Welcome to the Pewtercast. Today is Monday, July 17th, 2017, and this is episode 40, Yucking It Up with Jason Vuic. I'm Brent Allen, one of your hosts, and with me, as always, is a man who gives zero yucks. No yucks, y'all. Ren Dax, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. By the way, listeners, Brent never clues me in as how he's going to introduce me. So I have noticed that I laugh a lot, just like the first thing out of my mouth when Brent tosses it over to me. So that's the reason why I didn't know the zero yucks was coming. But yeah, I'm doing good. It was the interview's already in the can, and it was such a fun interview.
Yeah.
And I think we're really good. I think every Bucs fan should read his book, but you're in for a treat. It was really fun. It doesn't matter when you jumped on the Buccaneers bandwagon. This will be an episode for everybody, and I think everyone's really going to like it, especially with no content coming out of one Buc play. So I'm really excited. Yeah,
it should be a very, very fun episode. But before we get there, Ren, you've actually got a bit of news to share with all of our Pewtercast listeners out there. Why don't you tell us what's going on?
I do. As some of you may know, in the earlier episodes, I would talk about Real Bucs Talk a lot, and I was writing for them. So now I am writing for the Pewter Plank. Friends of the show. I had my first piece a few days ago dropped about how Jason Light has slipped the 90-man roster by 92%.
Fantastic piece. Great piece, by the way. Yeah, it's really good.
Thanks, man. Yeah, he flipped the roster by 92%, in just 4 years. So I got a little love, not only from Brent just then, but Trevor Sikkema actually retweeted out, the link to it, which was huge because he's got Trevor Sikkema from Pewter Report. He's got 10,000 followers. So it was really well received. I'm very excited. And also, Derek Fournier, I reached out to him during the off season from What the Buck Old School. He was nice enough to let me also do some writing for his website, whatthebuck.net. So yeah, thank you very much to the guys at Real Bucs Talk. They just switched to a .com during the off season. They sell T-shirts and they're looking for video clips of games. Yeah. And some good stuff. Plus, write some good stuff for them. They've also brought in a couple of other guys. I've seen some other authors besides Michael put some stuff out this off season. Thank you so much to those guys. But yeah, I'm with the Pewter Plank and What the Buck, and I really couldn't be happier. I'm very excited for the opportunity.
Yeah, man. Well, Ren, man, super proud of you. Congratulations. And just to clarify, you're staying with us, right? You're not jumping ship on us. You're going to stay right here at the Pewtercast as our co-host, right?
Well, I think I have to, because before we started recording, we kind of broke down what sort of how the podcast season's going to break down for us coming up in August.
Oh boy!
For those of you who don't remember, or maybe you do, it's just a reminder, we will be doing a Talking Knox, a live call-in show after each Talking Knox episode airs on HBO, and then with all the other shows for the preseason games and the regular weekly shows. And then I'm also talking about doing sort of maybe a 10-15 minute diary from training camp, because I live in the area. I'm going to get to as many training camps as possible. As of right now, I think I can get to all of them. And then Brent was telling me that he's going to go to the training camps in Jacksonville.
Yep.
As listeners know, he just moved from South Carolina.
Yep.
We did the math, and I think it adds up to 27 different episodes.
Yeah, we're close, guys. Listen, this has been the long dark night of football, guys, and this is the last episode of the long dark night of football, because I'll tell you what, when we come back, we're pretty much for the entire month of August gonna have something just about every single day is going to be coming out through the podcast feed. So you guys, those of you guys who've been begging us for more content, it's coming, guys. The off season, we work within the rhythms of the year, and this, it's kicking up. It's amping up right here. So it's coming. We are super, super excited. But hey, listen, those are future episodes. Talking Knox, real quick, premiering our Talking Knox show will premiere on August 1st. That's 1 week before Hard Knocks premieres on HBO. That'll be a preview show You guys get your phone calls ready. We're going to be talking about what we're expecting to see on Hard Knocks. We want to hear from you guys. We're using our Instant Cast platform to be able to produce that show. It's going to be super fun. But Ren, let's talk about today's show. This is why we're here right now. For our main segment, Ren and I, as we alluded to earlier, got the chance to have a conversation with Jason Vuic, the author of the book, The Yucks, 2 years in Tampa with the losingest team in NFL history. It's really not just about those first 2 years. It's really all about how the Bucs came to be as an organization. Definitely some in-depth detail on those first couple of years, but then there's also a great bit of history about that first NFC title run and kind of a blow-by history all the way up to like 2015. So really good book about the history of our beloved Buccaneers. We had a fun talk with Jason. You guys are going to love that. And then kind of in sticking with that theme for our top three, this week we're going to be talking about our top three unsung heroes of the Creamsicle days. Those guys that people maybe really don't know much about. And then we're going to close out the show, as always, with our fan interaction segment. All of that is coming your way today on the Pewtercast. You're listening to episode 40 of the Pewtercast. Ren, we have a very, very special guest who is on the line with us today. We talked about it just a little bit briefly in the last episode. About a year ago, I think it was, a book came out that was about our beloved Buccaneers, and honestly, probably about the worst time in the history of our beloved Buccaneers, those first couple of years where we went 0-26. I think it was 0-22 and 28 on the first two seasons. I think it was, Ren. We actually have the author, Jason Vuic, is with us today to talk about the book. Jason, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't we jump into it? For people who may not be familiar with your book. Now, listen, we've got this show is listened to by Bucs fans, so hopefully everybody who's listening to this is familiar with your book, has at least heard about it. Hopefully they've actually bought it for you as well, because we're big fans of promoting other things that are surrounding the Bucs. But if they haven't, encapsulate for us just a little bit about what your book is about.
Well, I grew up 100 miles south of Tampa in Punta Gorda, a little town. I'm a native Floridian. And when I was growing up, we didn't have blackouts. We were far enough away from Tampa where we got to see the Bucs, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the early days. And we were also far enough from Miami where we could get the Miami games with no blackouts. And, games were blacked out, home games, and maybe they still are, I guess, if there's not enough tickets sold. Well, there were never enough tickets sold during the early days, in the 80s, when the Bucs were really losing. But I loved them. I love the Bucs. My favorite player was Doug Williams. I met him as a kid. He came to play a charity basketball game in my high school, Charlotte High School. And I fell in love. I mean, as only a 10-year-old kid does with a pro athlete. I wanted to be him. And from then on, I was a Bucs fan. And even when he left, I was a fan through, the early 80s, late 80s, and into college. And my team was the worst team in the NFL. The years that I spent going to Tampa Stadium were to see a really bad football team. And I was still a fan. And there were many, many fans like me. And I always wanted to write a book about that, kind of how the Bucs came to be, and how a team, what it meant to the Bay Area. That's what I wanted to write about, and kind of a history of the team and a history of Florida in a way, which is why I came to it.
So, it was one of those things. I found it was real interesting because I actually just got to read the book here over this last week, which, by the way, I actually did it on audiobook. in that format, because me and reading, it goes slow if I'm actually turning the paper pages. But if I get somebody going to me, in my ears, it goes. But I was going through it, and that first chapter, I was real surprised. You spend not a long time. You spend a good bit of time talking about the history of Tampa Bay, like almost how it was formed out of the sea. Like you go pretty far back. And I just remember kind of noting, like, why is he talking about this? And it was real interesting to me because as you went forward, like, you actually kind of had to understand a little bit of that to understand why Tampa needed a football team.
Yeah, well, even how Tampa got a football team.
Yeah.
People don't realize how the growth in Florida was just so explosive. It's still explosive. I mean, even from, when I left for college in 90, I never really lived in Florida, and I still have family, all over Florida. But, it doubling populations every so many decades. Now it's the second or third largest state by population. And there was a time when Tampa was just tiny. I mean, it was maybe 200,000 people when it got on the NFL map. And so you had to include all of these other communities in the Bay Area, Clearwater, St. Petersburg, Brandon, Bradenton, and they were all growing. Lakeland, all the way to Ocala and all the way down to Sarasota was really in the early formative days of trying to land a franchise. They included all of those cities. People from Sarasota were on the committees to bring a football team. And so, that's the big part of it is how did such a small town that was really unknown to Americans? Most Americans didn't know where Tampa was. They knew where Miami was. And they had certainly never heard of the term Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was a body of water. It wasn't a place. But now, you go out of the state and you meet someone from Florida and you say, where are you from? And they go, I'm from Tampa Bay.
Right.
And you never heard that 30 years ago. You never heard that. I mean, Tampa Bay is a body of water, but it's become, because of the Bucs and early on the Rowdies and also, the baseball and hockey, it's become a place. It's become a location in the United States. And that's really the genesis of why I examined all that in the very beginning.
Hey, Jason, this is Ren here. I have to admit, I've read the book as well, but I have to admit it took me a little while to get over the title. As you, I think we're around the same age. I'm a lifelong Bucs fan. Family had season tickets the first 10 years. Huge Doug Williams fan. I even had, the Sears bicycle that was all decked out in Tampa colors.
I remember those.
Remember those? And you'd get like you'd get a little sheet of all these different numbers, and you could put your favorite number up on, almost like a license plate that went over the front of your handlebars. And of course, as you probably would have if you had one, I picked Doug Williams. But the title, the Yucks, 2 years in Tampa with the longest team, with the losingest team in NFL history, I was a bit, that hurt my feelings. Just kind of like probably the reason why you wrote the book. Going through high school and going through college. Yeah, I'm a Bucs fan, and people constantly would laugh at you, and you're always like, someday.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someday. But the beginning of your book, when you talk about how the team came to be, and you started delving into, John McKay and some of his famous quotes that he would say, or how Hugh Culverhouse leased a plane from a chainsaw company. Of all those stories that you came up with while doing the research for your book, like what was like your favorite and what surprised you the most?
Well, Hugh Culverhouse, John McKay is fascinating, and I could see, someone playing him in a Hollywood movie, very, very complicated figure. But Hugh Culverhouse, just the cheapness of that man. When I would ask people, was he really that cheap? Because, fans don't know sometimes, they don't know the ins and outs of why someone makes this much money and why they let someone go.
Sure.
But he was so cheap in the beginning. I spoke with really the man who brought pro football to Tampa, a man named Bill Markham. Was a local JC member. He held a charity football game in 1968, and that just snowballed into a franchise. And Bill Markham was the first Buccaneers employee. He was the public relations director in the very beginning, before there was even a mascot, before there was colors, before there was a coach. And he sat down with Hugh Culverhouse at the Airport Host Hotel, which I don't even believe exists anymore, but it was this hotel by the airport where the Bucs had their first office. They had a secretary, Bill Markham, and Culverhouse, who worked in Jacksonville. He didn't even live in Tampa yet. This was in 1975. And they sat down for a meeting with the management of the hotel. We need this many chairs. We need this much, this many pens and paper and desks. And this is what we need. Oh, and Culverhouse looks at the manager and says, oh, I would like you all to pay for our team's letterhead because your address is going to be on there. And he wanted to save money on letterhead. And you're not even talking about the size of the Buccaneers today. What are you talking about? 10 reams of paper? I mean, right. And that was the level of his cheapness. And that was from the very beginning. And I have other theories on why he was so cheap and how that moved into the future, but that was the story that really blew my mind. He bought a used couch for $1 place for the lobby. He painted the cinder block walls white so he didn't have to buy screens. And he was proud of this in the press, and in today's
look how smart I am.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take care of this franchise. I'm not going to waste any money. And you're like, maybe that one really shocked me though. And people who knew, he's Hugh Culverhouse Jr. I interviewed him and he's like, yeah, my dad was fatally cheap. And it affected the Bucs. Once McKay left, once, that core of good players that was brought in by Ron Wolf, it led to, over a decade of just abysmal sub 300 percentage football. So, that's the story that really blew my mind.
Right. But to that, one of the things that I was noting, that you had mentioned you were talking about was, I think you said this towards the beginning of the book that, whether you see the Bucs as successful or unsuccessful in those early years really depends on how you look at it. Because even though the Bucs were a losing team for so many years, they were successful financially. And if you're an accountant or you're a whatever and you're a money guy, if they're successful financially, it doesn't matter what the record is, you've still won. That
was you.
So there's one thing to sit there and say, well, if you are Hugh Culverhouse, you're the owner. If your definition of winning is did I turn a $6 million profit at the end of the year or not, which, in the 80s, I don't know what that translates to today with inflation, but I mean, that's a crap ton of money.
Big money.
Money. Yeah.
Big money.
Yeah. That's huge.
Well, let's talk about Hugh, because he's so fundamental to understanding the early franchise. Hugh was a tax attorney from Jacksonville, and he had, into his 30s, he worked for the IRS. So into his 30s, he was a civil servant. He didn't come from money. He was self-made. So into his 30s, he, probably didn't make more than today's terms at $100,000 a year. And somehow he parlayed that from the mid-50s. By the mid-70s, he was able to buy a franchise for $16 million, right? So he knew how to make money. He knew how to save money. He really knew the value of a dollar. He was a Depression-era kid, served in World War II. And so when he got a hold of the Bucs, he had a lot of money, but he wasn't a mega millionaire. He had a lot of money tied up in land, Lakewood Ranch in Sarasota, other projects. And so he had to borrow money just to make the down payment. Just to make the down payment of the Bucs. So this wasn't Mark Cuban who could write a check.
Right.
And so when he started the Bucs, he really had to squeeze the team, and the contracts were already set. They were either rookie contracts or they were contracts given to him in the expansion draft. Mm-hmm. So the way you squeeze the team was to have 2 secretaries, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Tiny payroll. But the problem was, as the money flowed in the 80s and the contracts got bigger, Hugh didn't need to change his modus operandi. He ran the team as he ran the team in 1976, in 1990. And that was really the death of the Bucs. I mean, just not spending any money ever while Hugh really raked it in. I mean, he was worth hundreds of millions when he checked out. And that's just the history of our franchise, sadly enough, and interestingly enough.
Yeah, we've said this a couple times on the show before, but we consider, even though John Lynch was drafted during the quote-unquote creamsicle era, he's sort of seen as the new generation of Bucs, was on the Super Bowl team. But even when John Lynch, was on the team. The weight room was outside. Basically, it was a carport. And, and we're talking about an NFL franchise here. But what I want to get to in your previous answer, you were talking about, the Bucs hadn't had their mascot yet, hadn't had their color scheme. You talk about how the mascot came to be. There's a good story about the color scheme in there too, listeners. But how it came to be, they started out with sort of like a hangman's noose and a skull and crossbones. but they're sort of afraid of the Raiders because they, had a pirate with crossing swords type of deal. And then the Tampa Tribune cartoonist came up with Bucko Bruce, but they didn't necessarily like it. And in the book, it says a lady in PR thought it was sexy, so they kept it. Could you give me her name so I can find her and punch her in the nose?
Oh, I'll give it to you off the air. I'll give it to you. I gotta look it up, but I will definitely send it to you.
Ren, she is probably an old lady by now.
I believe she became George Steinbrenner's personal secretary after leaving the Bucs. Wow. So she's got an interesting life. So maybe you want to interview her as well. Well, Lamar Sparkman was the cartoonist for the Tampa Tribune. And he was given, I believe, did they pay him? I asked, and Bill Marcus said, no way. You never would have paid him. I think we gave him some tickets for the mascot, for the rights to the mascot forevermore. And I love Bucko Bruce. I wish they'd bring it back. He's awesome. But he designed that, gave it to them after designing. The first design was a hangman's noose. And you can imagine, what a disaster that would be. And so then he came back with pirates. Like Pirates of the Penzance or Long John Silver type. And a Buccaneer, according to Bill Markham, was more like a D'Artagnan, like a Three Musketeer. It was, a rakish rogue. That was the idea. And so they went back and said, no, it's got to be more like Errol Flynn. It's got to be more like Errol Flynn. And he came back with, what I described as kind of a BG. Look, one of the BGs, but it was perfect for the era. You have to remember, this is the 70s. This is the disco era. And the color scheme, they wanted to do something with Florida orange, 4 oranges. They had someone from, big orange grove owner and had the agriculture commission on the committee. So they did orange. And then they came back with like a teal, like an aqua color. And those colors were chosen and reported in the press. So the first Buccaneers colors were actually orange and teal. And
sounds familiar.
The league called them. The league called them and said, come on, this is Miami. What are you doing, knuckleheads? You never even told us. And so Hugh Culverhouse quickly had to backtrack. They met again, and they chose another, a red and some other orange, lighter shades of orange that they put together. And so that's how the colors came to be. And people liked it. And Buccaneer was, many people wrote in Buccaneers in a name that team contest, because of Gasparilla and the whole history of the Bay Area. So that's how the name and the colors came to be.
So I think one of my favorite stories about that, where it comes, you started describing the wink that Bucko Bruce has, was they didn't want to put they were going to put a patch on his eye, but then they didn't. So they had him winking or they had him like closing his eye, but it turned into like this like little like, hey, how's it going, sexy? Like, or something of that nature.
And especially in those days, I'm sorry about the wink. Yeah. And the winking in those days, same thing with the earring, in those days it had serious connotations of, Bucko Bruce being light on the loafers. And that's what they always thought Bruce was well into the 90s, that Bruce was effeminate. Players would say that. There was one, I forget who I cited, but when they were changing the uniform, I forget who it was. One of the Bucs in the early 90s, like, you can come ashore and steal his boat. He's not going to do anything about it. He's not going to stop you. Even the Bucs players would make fun of him. And so when this cute, pretty secretary in the office, she also worked in PR, said, I think it's all right. Now, all the men on the committee, they were all men. They went, oh, okay, we'll keep it. So that's how it was decided. It was supposed to be a sneer, but it really did look like a wink.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. So let me ask you this. So you're who are some of these people that you talk to? You've mentioned a couple of people that you got to talk to, but like, where did some of your material come from? Because a lot of what you do is you're quoting lines out of random newspaper articles, or this late night personality said this one thing in this one episode. And, you know, you've already mentioned, like I said, you're talking to various people. Like, how did the source material for this come about as you were doing your research, and who all you got to talk to?
Okay. Well, I have to say that, you know, you want to talk to the players. I want to get to Spurrier. I want to get to J.K. McKay, John McKay Jr., Rich McKay. And some people want to talk. Other people don't. You know, that's just the way it is. You know, I've written other books, and you get through to some people, and it surprises you sometimes. You know, I corresponded by email with Spurrier, but he had a book coming out, and I think he didn't want to talk. He's not crazy about talking about his experiences with the Bucs. But he was willing to talk to me, and then decided, I think because of this book, to just send me written responses. It didn't tell me much. You know, Rich McKay, I kind of started down that road, and then they didn't correspond with me anymore. Same thing with J.K. McKay. And I think, you know, they just didn't want any of the you know, it's a tough history. You know, no one wants to be associated with losing his team in the NFL. Other players like Mark Cotney, you know, loved it. Charlie Hanna, just a great interview. Dave Green, you know, these guys embrace that history. They're proud of it. They're proud of their experiences. Barry Smith, Lee McGriff, you know, Council Rudolph was wonderful. Dewey Selman was great. But I have to say too that the Bay Area had an incredible number of newspapers with really good sports writing. Lakeland Ledger, St. Petersburg Times, St. Petersburg Independent, Tampa Tribune. You know, so Tom McEwen was great. Right before he died, he talked to me. Hubert Meisel. You know, a lot of really good writers that followed the Bucs day after day after day. Every paper had a column every day of the week. So, you know, on a Monday, you'd talk about the injury report or something, anything. And really, it was quite easy to get a feel for, you know, what's week 7 like? You know, how's the team doing? What's wrong? What are they not doing? And pretty soon, you get a pattern to how the team's doing, like you guys would, you know, following the games, listening to other podcasts, other shows, reading the newspaper. But it was just a different level. You know, in those days, the coverage was amazing with so many newspapers.
Did you spend like just a crap ton of time in like a microfilm room, like in random libraries across, you know, Central Florida?
You know, I'm a historian. I do, you know, books like this. And so I have databases that I use, you know, and there's a lot of stuff on. At the time, Google put up a lot of newspapers online. They're taking them down, but all the St. Pete papers were on there. Tampa Tribune wasn't. So I had to really spend a lot of time in the Tampa library, losing my mind, you know, going through each day, I went through the first 2 years in the paper, the whole thing, to read about the Bucs. But the others, you know, in Sarasota papers, and then I interviewed the writers themselves for their memories, and they just those guys, like you guys, you know stories, you know, you know, you wouldn't do what you do unless you had that talent to do it. And you know, Jack Gurney, he was the mayor of Sarasota. He was a writer at the Sarasota Herald, and you know, he told me stories about being in the end zone when Dave Green, the punter, he's punting for the 57th time in a row, and they're getting killed, and he's got his feet on the back of the end zone, and they're about to try to block it for a safety, and he turns to Jack Gurney in the end zone, and he goes, "Hey, you want to trade places?" You know, I mean, that's the type of stuff you get from these journalists. You know, they all had great stories, all of them.
Right. So let me ask you this. Like, speaking of that, there's all these great stories. You mentioned earlier, like you could see somebody playing John McKay kind of character, like in a movie. And then obviously there's a Hugh Culverhouse, and of course Leroy Selman's going to pop in there. Doug Williams would pop in there. Like if this was a movie, who would be some of the other characters in the history of the Bucs that you think would kind of percolate to the top to be? Because one of the things for me, obviously Leroy Selman is a big one. I didn't become a Bucs fan until the late 90s. Dewey Selman seems to be kind of an unsung hero in the early days of the Buccaneers. Was there anybody else kind of like that you think would kind of percolate to the top?
Yeah, Dave Pear, just a weightlifting fanatic from, I think he went to the University of Washington, and he was lost on the end of the bench with the Colts. Colts had a very good team in those days, and he was a 6'1", 220-pound nose tackle. And he was just lost. He came to the Bucs and was just an animal. I mean, the most aggressive player in the league, and was the Bucs' first Pro Bowler. And so these are the type of guys that they found, diamonds in the rough. Mark Cotney, another one, just a great, safety. And Dewey, of course. Dewey was drafted, but he was also an undersized nose guard, and he had to lose weight, get svelte, get muscular. And in the summer, he got fast and became a linebacker. The unsung hero of the Bucs in all this was the defense. I mean, they became one of the most dominant defenses in the history of the NFL while losing all of these games. And the fans didn't know it. Johnny Carson didn't know it, but opposing coaches, all of them were like, shit, man. One of these days, we're going to have 3 interceptions, and they're going to beat us 10-9, and I'm getting fired. Matter of fact, I'll never work again.
Right.
And that eventually happened. That happened to Hank Stram and the Saints. So I would say, Dave Pear, Dewey, Charlie Hannah is another one lost in there. You focus on Doug Williams, focus on Jimmy Giles and Ricky Bell, but there were a lot of good players on those teams that came up through losing, really some serious losing, that formed the Bucs. David Lewis, Batman Wood, Mike Washington, some really good football players that survived the Bucs. And I think that would, to answer your question, I mean, those were the type of guys, but the defense, not the offense, they were horrible.
They were.
That's kind of the history of the Bucs for 40 some odd years, isn't it? I mean, a great defense, really bad offense, right? But now, now there seems to be something different. I mean, but even last year, I assume you still follow the Bucs, not necessarily to the depth that we do, but I mean, even last year when the Bucs went on that 5-game winning streak, we really could chalk that up more so to the defense than we could to the offense. But you still got to hand it to the offense. They still put points on the board to allow the team to win. So, the two have to work together. But man, that offense is looking like something else right now. And we can't wait. So let me ask you that. I want to put a pin in that conversation because I want to finish up the last one. One of the things that I found as I was reading the book is I think this would actually make a really good movie. Has anyone approached you about movie rights to the history of the Bucs?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Big screen,
really?
But I know. Hey, cross your fingers. But it's been out for about a year. We have a book to film agent with CAA, which the big agency. But so far it's still out there. You know what I mean? We get calls, and as a writer, I've optioned things before, and you're just looking for that one lightning to strike. And I'm not jaded, but I'll believe it when I see it. But it's out there, and the right people have control over it in order to make it happen. So. I see someone like Steve Spurrier playing, or Steve Spurrier being played by like Matthew McConaughey, someone like that in his, in his 30s, late 30s, kind of funny, comical, still youngish, but jaded. And, Michael Keaton, I think, could be a silver-haired John McKay. It would have to be a comedian that can do the highs or the lows, because that was John McKay. There was no middle there, Right. Hugh Culverhouse, I don't know. Maybe you guys can come up with someone. But those are the two that I've always thought about.
Ren, I think we've just found our top 3 for this episode.
Top 3 actors to play Hugh Culverhouse.
There you go.
I
have
2.
Yeah, go ahead, Ren.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One, about as far as agencies and movie rights and all that stuff, I know less than zero. If it does get picked up as a movie, are you going to be writing the screenplay? Or
No. I wish, but in the same way that I can write a book, screenwriters really know the ins and outs of that. You know what I mean? Oftentimes you'll see I wish I could. I'm actually going to take some courses in screenwriting. I mean, it takes a special talent just because you can write. There's different types of writing. But no, I don't think anyone would let me within 50 yards of that script.
Oh, well, fair enough. You talked about the Saints game. Yeah, right. You talked about the Saints game. Bucs' first win ever. Pretty much cost Hank Stram his job in New Orleans. This was something I didn't know about.
That was. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt there. The quarterback for the Saints for that game was Archie Manning. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are?
Peyton Manning's father.
Yes.
Peyton and Eli's dad.
Yes.
And he said, I don't want to be the guy to go down in history as the first person to lose to the Bucs. Like just before that
he
game.
said something like it would be shameful or something, but he denied it later. And there's all these different, myths and stories about it. There was one story that he told that to Walter Payton and said, oh, God, we can't lose there. It'd be shameful. And somehow, the story is Walter Payton then ran to Leroy and said, you know what he said about you? You know what he said about your mama? Something like that.
Right.
And who knows? He denies it and says, of course I wouldn't do that. I tend to believe Archie in that who the hell would bait that defense with such a bad football team? But they took it personally, and Leroy took it personally, and he was such an even-keeled dude. You woke a bear. It wasn't hard to get Dewey angry. It was very hard to get Leroy angry. He would knock you down and then help you up. Dewey would step on you. That was always what the coaches would say. And so they got the defense fired up, and then McKay apparently used that in the locker room, and the press picked it up. They had no problem, with things like that. Tom McEwen loved a good gossipy fight. And that really got the Bucs fired up for the game.
Wow, that's fun. Sorry, Ren, I didn't mean to interrupt. I had that in my thought as you were talking about it. You were talking about the Saints game. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, you wrote about sort of this impromptu party that happened at one Buck place after the Saints game. Can you just kind of take the listeners through that? Because as I was reading it, I was like, what? Cheerleaders on a building dancing? What's going on?
Well, that's the thing, with the book, The Yucks, so many fans, I'm like, you get haters, you get, with Instagram and Facebook, whatever. And I'd get responses that say, yeah, you called your book The Yucks, but they won a Super Bowl. And I'd say, of course they did. I know they did. I was cheering like crazy. This is part of being Buccaneer fans, part of embracing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this is what I wanted to emphasize in the book, that the Bucs won, and 5,000 or 6,000 people, maybe more, showed up at the airport to greet them. I mean, on a Sunday night for a 1 and 12 football team, a 1 and 26 football team. They raced. One person drove in from, I believe, somewhere way out in Polk County, Sebring, not even be in Polk, but somewhere far away. Drove in just to see because he wanted to be a part of history. And so the Bucs win the game because of the defense. 3 defensive touchdowns, just maul the Saints. Get on the plane, and Hugh Culverhouse, in what I wrote was a rare showing of generosity, brought steak to the plane for everyone. Everyone ate steak, drank champagne, but no one ate. And everybody got just trashed, and they danced seats. And Jack Harris told me, the famous radio announcer in Tampa, beloved, told me that it was the only plane he'd ever been on in his life that landed where everybody was standing up in the seats. It landed when they were standing up. The stewardesses, everybody was partying. They get on the bus, and they get back to One Buck Place, and it's pandemonium. I mean, it's a happy riot. It's a Mardi Gras in the streets. And people just party. They were standing up across the street. The cheerleaders got on the top of a hotel, a motel where the Bucs would stay for their training camp, and just danced. People, I was told that people took grass and sod and plants just to take home to say that they were there. And so that, to me, I enjoy reading about that than, a Bucs playoff victory in a good year. I mean, that shows what kind of fans they had. It was just, this is our team, and they embrace this losing team to that level, which is pretty remarkable to me.
Yeah, that all of that for one game, for winning a game.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, granted, it was the first game,
right?
It was the first game. Yeah.
Pent up everything,
Right. Now, let me ask you this, kind of moving forward in the story a little bit. When Doug Williams gets to the team, because, I know kind of the subtitle you're talking about going through the team with the first 2 years, but you really covered, really those first several years with the team. And then you did a really quick flyby of the rest of the history of the team up to about 2015 or so. With the advent of Doug Williams, well, I had two thoughts off that. One, I could have sworn for a long time you were describing the advent of Jameis Winston. Because the comparisons between
that, right?
like the comparisons between you're talking about Doug Williams coming in as a leader, and he was the game changer, and he was the guy who kind of came in and really made things happen, but he was real humble and very respectful, and it just really seemed like that was who you were describing was Jameis Winston, except you kept saying the name Doug Williams. Did you find that true?
Absolutely.
As you were
Jimmy
writing?
Giles. Jimmy Giles. I saw this in I believe, Tampa Bay Times a couple of years ago. Jimmy Giles was at a Bucs game, I think, for the 40th celebration, and said he's the second coming. I mean, Jimmy Giles was his star, more or less the Bucs star receiver in those days. He was a tight end, but he was the go-to man in that I formation, and he said that. I mean, none other than Jimmy Giles, and Doug Williams wasn't the gunslinger. I mean, football was different. Even Doug Williams later in his career with the Redskins was, more of a gunslinger. The first Bucs iteration, they didn't throw the ball that much. They'd keep it short. They'd hit the tight end. They ran the ball down their throats. I mean, that's what they did. And every once in a while, they throw the deep ball over the top. But the fans picked it up. And I have to say for Tampa, too, this is kind of forgotten. Doug Williams was an African-American quarterback.
Right.
And there weren't any. And that was, to me, even as a kid, it was he was different. He was different. And fans picked it up. And I'm not saying there wasn't a lot. I mean, a lot of stuff I talk to people off the record about racism in Tampa and problems with guys living in certain neighborhoods and fans mailing hateful things to people, things like that. But overall, the great majority of fans, Doug Williams, I think he overthrew a pass in his second pro pass in his first preseason game. He overthrew a guy and threw a bomb about 70 yards in the air, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation. They knew that this kid was different, and he was the best quarterback in the draft, and he was tough as nails. His jaw in the first, his first season, they would have had a winning record. They ended up winning 5 games. He won 4 of them, but he was out in game 6 or 7 with a broken jaw. They wired it shut. I mean, he had to have dental reconstruction, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Tough dude. And you add him, you add Ricky Bell, who was one of the toughest players to ever play football. And then that defense. And that was really, what Doug did. He was a game manager, really. He wasn't a gunslinger until later with the Bucs and then finally with the Redskins.
And that's actually the second thing that I did want to note that I want to talk, because you spent quite a bit of time talking about, and I just kind of found like a new level of pride in Tampa of being a franchise that really broke down some of the walls of racism in the NFL and around us, not just in drafting Williams, but in how Coach McKay stood up to some of the other people who, shall we just say, were racist in the area, and fans would call down to him.
Oh yeah, 77.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up, but if I heard you right, in 77 they were losing miserably, and the fans were getting angry. They really were. When they won the last 2 games, there was some optimism. But even in 78, Ricky Bell shows up. There's a lot of people didn't like McKay. Most fans didn't like McKay. People remember him as this grandfatherly figure today. It's not true. In those days, all the polls in the papers, they wanted him out. There were ads in the newspaper, coach wanted for the Bucs. People with California experience do not apply. There were signs in the stands that said "Slay McKay," not just "Go away," but "Slay McKay." Right? They didn't want him there, and he signs Ricky Bell. He drafts Ricky Bell, his former player at USC. So there's a lot of anger that we stink. This guy's from California. His players are from USC. There were more players from USC than anywhere else. And so when Ricky Bell didn't produce that first year, you got a lot of nasty, drunk people. I know McKay told one reporter that he hated the 4:00 games, hated them, because the fans started drinking early in the morning.
Right.
And he liked the 1:00 games because you wanted to get in and out before the crowds could get time to get rowdy. And, McKay was a smart man, and he didn't have any time for that kind of racism. He just didn't. He's famous for having black quarterbacks at USC, for supporting his players, friends of Bear Bryant. And there's that documentary where McKay was one of the reasons that Alabama brought in African-American players, finally broke the color barrier, because USC came in for a one-off game and just murdered them with African-American players. And suddenly old Alabama guard was like, maybe we should have some of those players too.
Right.
That was the documentary on 30 for 30. And McKay would hear these horrible things as he was going into the tunnel. And once someone shouted something, vile, and you can imagine at Ricky Bell. And McKay tried to go into the crowd. And that wasn't an act. McKay at 60, 65, whatever he was, he would have fought that person.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't taking any of that. And so you have to give him that, that he might have had his flaws in other ways. But he was a headstrong dude, and he just knew what he was doing was right on the field and the way he comported himself off the field. That was just McKay. And I think he did break down barriers. A lot of Buccaneers moved into neighborhoods that didn't have African Americans. And then you looked at the Bucs teams in those days. When I was a kid, I remember, I'm white, but I remember those teams being black teams. My favorite team had many black players on it, and my favorite quarterback was black. And I think I'm no different than many, many kids growing up in the Bay Area. You know what I mean? You love Doug Williams. You love the Bucs.
Right.
Yeah, I've already gone on record, and I second that. Yeah, it's just the way it was, and you loved your team. We recently, just to switch gears here for a little bit, Brent and I did a podcast where we did the Ring of Honor, because the Bucs released who the Ring of Honor, I guess not participants, inductees are going to be for this year. For someone who has researched the Bucs and heard stories from, the men on the inside, if you had to pick one Buccaneer that's not already in there, so one Buccaneer from those early days that you would like to make it up to the Ring of Honor, not necessarily, like great numbers on the field, but really encompasses like those early years as a Buccaneer, who would you pick to be able to go up there?
Well, I've already talked about Dave Pear. I don't know if he's in there. He should be. Not. He was the first. He should be. That is my straight up answer. I have another guy, but Dave Pear, because he was the first Buccaneers Pro Bowler. He made the Pro Bowl before Leroy did, and he was more than any other player on defense. He was the most popular Buc in 76 and 77, not Leroy. Leroy everyone loved him. They knew he was the future star. He had some injuries. He was out here and there, but Dave Pear was a guy who would fight through the line and just hook a running back by the foot and jump up and gesticulate. He would jump around. He was a fitness fanatic, and he would bench press just enormous weights. He looked like Conan. He looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger from Conan, and he was kind of crazy. And he was a crazy football player that people really couldn't control. Even John McKay would say, he was almost uncontrollable, but that's what you want on your defense, right? And he really was someone who excited fans at a time when there was no excitement. You lose that many games in a row in the heat, and you start to get delirious, right? And Dave Pear was a star. The other person I'd put in there, but he wouldn't go in there for his football ability, was Lee McGriff. Great interview, great guy. Unknown to Bucs fans because he was cut by the 6th week. He was I think he was from St. Pete, somewhere in the Bay Area. He had walked on at Florida. He was about, 5'9", 160, soaking wet. Little white dude. His son was Travis McGriff. If you remember the Gators of the 90s, he was a good receiver on the national championship team. Travis McGriff. Yeah. He's a mega Gator. He went to Florida. He works up there now. He used to be on Gator staff. I think he's on search committee. He's an insider with the Gators, but he fought his way onto the University of Florida roster in 73, 74, 75, became all SEC, and then got cut by Dallas in one of their last cuts and was picked up by the Bucs and started for the Buccaneers. Started and made his way on that first team and had a ball in the first game. Steve Spurrier threw a ball into the corner of the end zone, and McGriff reached out for it. And the dome was so crappy, the floor, they had just pulled that fake carpet over a piece of plywood.
Oh my God.
And so he gets to the corner of the end zone, and he's about to make the first catch in the history of the Bucs, and his foot hits that plywood, and he gets discombobulated, and he drops it.
Oh.
and so the reason I like him is because he represents so much of those early Bucs. They shouldn't have been there. They're trying so hard. You know, even the football gods are conspiring against them. You know, the Florence did it, you know?
Right.
And he ended up his career. They threw him a lateral somehow, and he threw a pass. So he finished his career, NFL career, with 6 games, no receptions, 1 completion. And that's why I like Lee McGriff, because he was just such an early Buck. I mean, he really represented that franchise.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I remember that stat line in your book, and and it took me a while to kind of figure it out. Like, how is that possible? And I had to run through it. Okay, I got it. But some of those stat lines that we were both very young, and they were our team, win or lose. You weren't really familiar with the NFL, and you weren't really sure which were the great teams or not. So, and the Bucs defense kept us in a lot of games. But some of those offensive stat lines that the Bucs put up those first 2 years, they were, you talk about the guy who started year 2 because the first 2 guys went down, and he threw like 18 interceptions for no touchdowns. That was like his whole career. Offensively, we
Randy
were
Hedberg.
bad. There you go. Yeah, it was.
The worst
that
ever.
Was
the worst teams ever. The worst teams ever. Unfortunately, the worst teams ever in the history of the NFL. And you know, I love the Bucs, and I think just being a Bucs fan, you embrace that. It's like the Cubs, right? You know, you embrace your past. You embrace what's made you a team like that. But the worst 2 years, really the worst 2 offensive years in modern football history, easily.
Yeah, easily.
Well, Jason, I've got I put a little thing out on Twitter earlier today, just kind of getting to say that we'd get to spend some time with you, and I had a fan actually write back say, "Hey, ask him this question." So this is a question from
Sure.
Mitchell Northern, who has read the book, and he's asking, in your research, was there any other team in any sport that Johnny Carson, and I'll even extend that to any late night people, that maybe got made fun of more than the Bucs? Or maybe even just as bad as the Bucs, because that whole, you talk about the Johnny Carson thing with the Bucs up towards the beginning of the book, and that I found that hilarious personally.
Yeah, you know, I wasn't able to find any other team that's been ridiculed like that, and it's also a different time. Remember, there were 8 or 9 channels on your dial, and Johnny Carson was the most popular man on television. You know, there was no internet, there was no other medium, there was no MTV, no. Even the changes in the 80s and 90s that took viewers away. You know, there was Johnny Carson, and every night, most middle-class parents, I remember my dad would watch the monologue with Johnny Carson, then go to bed. You watched the monologue, and that monologue really set the tone for what people talked about in America. You know, 5 or 6 million viewers a night, and he made jokes one after another, over and over and over. And it just became a national phenomenon. And when one comedian would see another, then they all copy each other. And the Bucs became, you know, really a national phenomenon. And I can't find any team that people embrace negatively or positively like that. You know, I mean, I looked up some bad, there was a Tigers team. I forget in my book, but in the early 2000s, I believe that lost, you know, 100-something games, you know, one of the worst teams of all time. And no one cared. No one really cared but baseball fans. And even then, it wasn't a phenomenon, you know, but the Buccaneers made it into sitcoms. You know, the Buccaneers made it into jokes. And so I loved studying that aspect of it. And in spite of all of that, the Buccaneers, by losing, really put Tampa on the map, Tampa Bay. People knew where the Bay Area was because of the Buccaneers. And created a sense of community, really.
Yeah, that was fun. I think by the way, you had said that that team, the Tigers team that lost, happened in the same year that the Bucs won the Super Bowl, and like nobody even knew. Like, nobody had anything. Well, kind of moving forward into the Super Bowl, you know, you spend quite a time towards the end of the book, detailing out some of doing a real quick flyby of really the rest of the history of the Bucs. You can't help but notice, if you're a current Bucs fan and you're paying attention to what's going on with the team really for the last 10 or 15 years, and kind of the it's been dark days to be a Bucs fan again these last bunch of years. But to notice some similarities, real striking similarities between even kind of what's going on with the head coaching positions and maybe even some organizational moves. Are there any similarities that you see? Anything reminiscent and any lessons? If you were to sit down with the Glazers and say, "Hey, learn from history," what would what kind of things do you see happening there?
Well, every reporter told me, you're focusing on those early years. You're focusing on those first 2 years. But every one of them said, oh, man, if you want to write about the bad years, write about the 80s. The beginning was fun. It was different. Mm-hmm. They had an excuse. But the 80s, they didn't have an excuse. And so when I began to look at the 80s, after McKay left, what I would tell a general manager today, and I'm not sure how much the Bucs have done this or not, but, trading away number one draft picks desperately to get in a quarterback or, number one players not wanting to come, coaching turnover. They had 8 coaches or four different head coaches in 8 years in the 80s. I mean, what do you do with that? Yeah. How do you win?
Lose.
How can you possibly do that?
Uh-huh.
And I'm not saying that you should have kept Schiano or anyone else. I don't have a dog in that fight, but it's got to hurt.
Yeah.
You can't build. You know what I mean? And my response when Lovey got fired, not knowing anything about the Bucs, I mean, I'm sure you have fans that wanted him out or in or whatever. I was like, oh man, that can't be good. And it turned out to be all right. Right. And maybe it'll be a great move. But I thought to myself, oh, here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to give another guy 2 years and then we're going to bounce him or 3 years or 4 years, so there's no continuity. That's what I found from the Buccaneers in those days, just no continuity. And I'm hoping, with the continuity at quarterback, it really starts there. And then in the defensive players, I was really happy with the last draft and this draft too, but the one before that I was happy because it was a defensive draft. I remember. And so, I think, yeah, I was very happy with Hargraves too. And that, I think that's what it is. In today's league, especially in that division, you need to throw the ball. You need offense. I know it's a different game. It's kind of like basketball today, right? You got to move the ball. But defense was something they relied on, and they got away from that in the 80s. They just gave away picks, and they had this massive turnover. And it's the turnover that I would fear, and hopefully this is the end. Because the Bucs have had, I don't know how many coaches in the last decade. But I hope they get away from that. I hope we have a coach here for 15 years, right? 20 years. I mean, that's generally the mark of, Tomlin at Pittsburgh. That's the mark of a good franchise, right? Is coaches that are there for a decade.
Well, I mean, we can tell you that the Bucs have had 5 head coaches since 2009. I think it was when Gruden flipped over into Raheem. So yeah, I mean that's averaging one every 2 years. So. And I'm not saying you want to be the Brown, you want to keep a coach for 7 years and lose, 14 games every year. You got to do something. I understand. Right.
But the constant turnover is just a recipe for disaster. And you see it. Ira Kaufman reported, when I was doing the epilogue, I put it in right at I was about to send it to the editor and I had to put it in there. The Bucs had 5 last place finishes in the NFC South in a row, 5 in a row. And that had never happened in the history of modern football since the merger.
Right.
And so there has to be a connection there. These are all skilled people, but when you're only there for 2 years, you're not going to develop anyone, and that's what happened to the Bucs in the 80s. Just, it was the land of misfit toys. It's where you went to serve your time to get the hell out. And one player after another, my experience was one player after another left the Bucs to become good elsewhere.
Right.
I mean, that was part of being a Bucs fan, is to say, oh man, we had him. What's he doing in the Super Bowl?
Right.
And I hope that's not happening or hasn't happened with the last 10 years, but I assume it might have happened.
Yeah, I think, certainly the head coaching one, I think, is a big one that I picked up. The other one that I would say is when Jameis Winston is ready to renew his contract, give that man his contract. Like, don't let him go like we let Doug Williams go. That would be horrible.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fundamental thing, right? I mean, It took the sales out of the whole city, the whole region.
Right.
When Doug left.
Right. And set us back for 20 years. I mean,
it just killed the franchise. Yeah. Yep. And I would see if that happened to Jameis, that would be similar in a different way, in a more modern way, that it could easily do the same thing. It would just kill your franchise. You need a quarterback.
Right. Well, all right. So I've got two more questions for you. One, I kind of want to switch gears. And well, I want to ask you this. Any thoughts about a sequel to the book? Maybe the mid-90s team, or even the turnaround of what's happening right now?
I'm sorry. Say that again. I didn't hear you.
I said, any thoughts about a sequel? Kind of maybe writing a second part of the book?
Yeah, like a Yucks part 2.
Yeah. I say that. Because I say that because we talk about a lot here where even like with Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks, like they had what we call their "that shit ends now" moment, where they heard somebody mention, "Oh, the Yucks are playing," and it was Warren Sapp looked at Derek Brooks. It was 1996, I think it was. They said that shit ends now, and that's kind of the moment that we said everything. That we've said on this show. It seems like that's the moment when everything really turned.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think too. I felt a little bit of a turn when Sam White arrived. Just a little bit, not a lot, but it was a little bit different. It was a little bit different than business as usual, right? And then Dungy came. I remember right away that people liked this guy. And then there was the rise of the Florida program in football. So who wouldn't draft from Miami, Florida State, and Florida in those days, right? I mean, you draft from there now anyways, but it was like it took you this long, college, for the pros to figure out, the Bucs to figure out that we need to get these guys, these Florida players. They're dominant. And I think, that's what happened. So that, that's really what I believe was the turnaround, but I was against doing a worst to first book. That's such a trite thing. And the Bucs had so many years of losing after that 79 season with Doug Williams, 14 losing seasons in a row. So it didn't build to anything.
Right.
I mean, the Buccaneers were in the wilderness. They were in the desert. And they were in the desert year after year after year. And so, that's why I avoided that worst to first kind of thing. And I wanted to avoid it too at the beginning because 79 was such a magical run. They still only made it to the NFC Championship game. It was an amazing run for a team that had lost that many games in 4 years to do, but they still didn't win the Super Bowl. They didn't go to the Super Bowl. And so, I wonder how I'd put that together. I love the 90s, the team that came together into the 90s, that ended up winning the Super Bowl in the 2000s. I mean, it was just phenomenal. So, I think I would do something with just the disastrous, Bo Jackson, Steve Young, Vinny Testaverde. I mean, just disastrous years that the fans still embraced. I mean, I went to many, many games and loved it. And, I would like to bring a lot of fans in. Why did you go? Why did you support the Bucs when they didn't support you?
Right. Yeah. So now with that, okay, so talking about the fans, I think this is kind of the last question that I have. So you're a Bucs fan. You've been a Bucs fan. You said you grew up a Bucs fan. You've been one mostly your whole life, from the Tampa Bay area. We have lots of Bucs fans who listen to this show. Who some like Ren have been fans since the beginning. Others kind of came on somewhere in the middle, and we even have several listeners who are relatively new Bucs fans. People who are kind of jumping onto the bandwagon right now. What message would you have for Bucs fans? Like, you're kind of the team historian now. Like, you're seeing what's going on. What would you say to Bucs fans right now?
Well, I mean, to me, your team is your team. And I read these when the Bucs were losing, when the book was coming out, I read on Joe Bucs Fan on the site, these responses, and there was so much anger, and I know tickets aren't cheap. You bring your family, and I don't know what it costs, hundreds. And there's a lot of anger there. You want your team to win. And, I'm a Florida basketball fan. When they lose, I'm throwing things at the TV. But I'm still on the message boards. I still support the team. And so it's possible for me to write a book called The Yucks and still be a lifetime fan. I'll be a fan in 20 years. I'll be an old man cheering for the Bucs whether they win or lose. And I think it's a message in fandom, that you're not going to win every year. And your team, transcends kind of winning and losing to encompass the culture of your area. And that's the message I wanted to get through, that even in losing, The Bucs, had great fans. I mean, there were 40, 50,000 people coming to those games, leaving a lot of seats empty, but still that's a lot of people for teams that had 14 losing seasons in a row. So, and I know there was a lot of anger when the Bucs, went through these 5 coaches and, they were losing horrible games. I remember the Monday night game of 2 years ago when they gave up 28 and a quarter.
Yeah.
And it was just brutal. It was brutal. And there's no other way other than shut the TV off and be angry. But I'm not going to walk away from the team.
Right.
I'm not going to walk away from any owner. They may make me mad. Might be mad when the city or the county gives too much to the team in terms of facilities or some tax deal. But in general, I'm a Bucs fan. I mean, I don't care if they lose every game. I don't want them to. I don't take pride and joy in that. But I'm going to keep rooting for Winston, and I'm going to root for these other guys, and hopefully they'll put it together. They'll capture lightning in the bottle, and we'll get to experience that high. After rooting for the Bucs for so many years, I can't tell you the joy I felt when they won that Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I can't believe this has happened. I mean, waking up in the morning and you read the papers from then and the writers, Tom McEwen and Hubert Meisel, they were like, this is unbelievable. I can't believe I'm putting pen to paper to say this, but the Buccaneers are the world champions. And I'm going to feel the same way again after these terrible, 2000s since the Super Bowl. I'm going to feel the same way again. Hopefully it'll be in a couple of years.
Yeah. It's I think along with everyone listening to this show remembers very viscerally what it was like to be there watching the Bucs win. And I had only been a fan for a couple of years up to that point. I can only imagine what that must have been like being a fan of the team for 20 plus years at that point, about 25 years, I guess. Having gone through that history, that's wow. That's just a phenomenal thing. Ren, do you have anything else you want to ask for Jason as we wrap up here?
Nothing for the listeners, to be honest. Like, now that I know how long he's been a Bucs fan, there's questions like, did you ever go to the Mark Cotney, Scott Brantley football camp? I remember in the book he was talking about how he went to a Chicago game when he was young, and then sort of right after that, you told the story about how the Bucs finally cinched that Kansas City game and that monsoon of a game, 3-0. Like, I was at that game. Like, I was just like you said in the book, I was soaked to the bone, and I had a parka on. I was still soaked to the bone. But those aren't really, our listeners don't care, but they hear Jason and I, talk about the old days. So I think I'm good. Is there anything else that you want to tell the listeners? You want to reach out to them so they can, talk to you on social media or anything such as that?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. On my website's jasonbuic.com. And I'm moving into other books on Florida. I might even do a book on the rise of Florida State's football dynasty from a women's college and a school that wasn't particularly good at football into becoming the powerhouse that it was. So it might be a similar type of book, this rise of a team from the wasteland, But again, I love the Bucs, so go Bucs, definitely.
Well, there you go. Well, Bucs fans, if you have not got a copy of it yet, you can pick up the Yucks at pretty much any major bookstore. Is that right, Jason? It's I know definitely on Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been now. I gotta be honest. And this is more of just my Bucs fandom. Every time I'm in a bookstore and I see the Yucks, if your book is like kind of sideways, like, and you just see the spine, I always move the books around on the shelf and turn it to where the front of the book is facing. Like it's a featured book. That's just me. Because I encourage everyone to do the same. And pick up a copy of the book and buy it. So
I was when we decided the title at the Yucks, I wanted to make sure I had enough, especially the epigram in the beginning. I wanted Warren Sapp's words. When Warren Sapp was drafted, or his brother wanted to be drafted by the Bucs, he said, "The Yucks? Are you kidding me?" And that's the way. That's where we were, along with Warren Sapp, and I wanted people to know that. But I expected, people to see the title and go, "Oh man, I don't want to open this," But I hope they do. I hope they realize that it's a lighthearted and endearing account, in my opinion. It's I love Ricky Bell. I love Doug Williams. I mean, the Ricky Bell part, him getting sick and dying, just tore me up to even research. And so it's a history of the team. Embrace it. I mean, that's who we are, and that's what I wanted to write.
And hey, listen, those 2 years ends on a real positive note. I mean, you guys heard him talking about the party that happened after the win of the first game, and the advent of Doug Williams and what that meant for the team, and the fact that John McKay had a 5-year plan that they stuck to, and they accomplished it in just 4. So that regardless of those first 2 years, that's pretty damn good. Did it better than the sister team, the sister expansion team, the Seahawks. So.
Did it faster at least.
Yeah, did it faster. So Bucs fans, here's what I would say to you guys: support this book. And I would happen to believe that the more book sales we get, the bigger of a possibility we might get a movie about it. And it's actually a Hollywood story type movie. Like, I could see this becoming a thing. And man, some of these guys would be great characters to see on screen, and I would personally love to see that. But Jason, I really, really want to thank you for your time, for getting in here and talking to the Bucs fans as a whole about a book that you really wrote. I'm going to go ahead and say you wrote it for us. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll take it as a Bucs fan. It's really a part of our history.
Good. Thank you. I really appreciate it, guys.
And that was Jason Vuic. Once again, many, many thanks going out to Jason for taking out about an hour to talk with us. Ren, what did you think about getting to have that conversation with Jason and maybe some of the things he said?
As a lifelong Buck fan, it was almost like a dream come true to be able to sort of, sit down and pick the brain of the guy that wrote the book on the first 2 years of the history of the team. And for all of you out there, I sort of alluded to it in the interview, but for all of you out there that kind of look at the title and, sort of grit your teeth and like, I really would like to say it is a love letter from a fan to that team. Before I kind of understood what the book was, I think I saw it at a bookstore. Maybe I saw it online, and I was like, it reads, as a Buck fan, especially a lifelong Buck fan, where you know what the history is, it sort of reads as a pot shot to you. Almost a punch in the gut. It's like, oh, great. We know we were bad. I had to put up with it, my whole adolescent life. Now I got this book just kicking me in the gut. But that is so much further from the truth what the book is. Yeah. I highly recommend it to anyone. Like I said earlier, no matter when you jumped on the bandwagon, I really recommend it to read. But
yeah, and Ren, if I could jump off of that, as somebody who's on the other side of the fandom, where I didn't come in until the Bucs were really a winning team back in the late 90s, I know for myself, and I would assume that other people who are let's say latecomers to the fandom, they might kind of agree with it. You kind of want to ignore those years, and just kind of go, I was a fan from here forward. Like, that's it's been hard enough since I've become a fan. Like, I don't need to relive that. But if you're like me, let me tell you what, you want to know the history of your team. And more than that, this is really, it's just a good story. Like, I really enjoyed going back and seeing the history. It's kind of the Bucs mantra. They weren't as bad as their record showed. There was actually some really bright spots that you want to make sure that you know about. Although there were certainly some ish times there, but it definitely is worth the read. It's a real easy read too. Real easy read. It goes real quick, real super fast.
Yeah, agreed with everything you said. And some of those things, like the early history, were some of my favorite parts. What I didn't know and kind of struck me as like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Hall of Fame GM Ron Wolf, who built 3 Super Bowl winning teams, was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' original GM. And he was the guy that sort of put all those players together to go from that supplemental draft that was so unfair and so skewed to one side than it is today. He put that together, and the book sort of alludes to that John McKay ran him out. He wanted control of the team and sort of let him go. But as a Bucs fan, just thinking like what it would have been to have Ron Wolf as your GM from, through the 80s.
Yeah, you bring that up. It's something that I wanted to talk to Jason about. It didn't work out in the conversation. But one of the real interesting things in reading the book is you can kind of see how you can learn the mistakes that the Bucs made way back when, and then you can see when we stopped making those mistakes. And then honestly, when we started making those mistakes again, and how it tanked the team for these last 15 years, and how you can see Jason and Dirk and these guys turning those mistakes around yet again. And now look, we are turning back into a winning team. And the excitement level is super high for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And one of those things is what you just talked about, is when you have the coach and the GM as two separate entities, and the coach is not in control over player personnel, things tend to go better around, at least in Tampa. I don't know about other teams, but at least here in Tampa. And even if you look back as recently as Lovey, you remember that was one of the things that he insisted on having, was final say over the 53-man roster. And, we can see what happened, so maybe that's a lesson to learn, that the coach shouldn't have that final say. But either way, those are just some things that, those are fun little things I think that you get to pick up on, and you can see what we're doing, why what Jason and Dirk and those guys are doing right now is working so well. Just in kind of learning the mistakes of history and the triumphs of history.
Agreed. Yeah. Not much I really want to go into further. I don't want to spoil the book for the fans that go out there and do pick it up, but you will enjoy it. And then, after you read it, you have somebody that you know is a Bucs fan and, needs a little push, pass the book along, because once they get past the title and they start to read it, they're going to love it too, and they'll thank you as well.
Yeah. So, guys, once again, you can get the Yucks. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any place you can pick up a book. You pretty much can find it. You can order it there. Jason Vuic, V-U-I-C is how you spell that last name. The Yucks, 2 years in Tampa with the losingest team in NFL history. Not really a great title to describe what all is within the book, but that is the title nonetheless. Well, Bucs fans, now we'd like to know your thoughts on our thoughts. You can do that by shooting us an email to thepewtercast@gmail.com. What did you think of the interview? Have you read the book? Have you not read the book? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you guys. Shoot us an email there, or you can find us on Twitter @thepewtercast or on facebook.com/thepewtercast. We do respond to all forms of feedback, and really, it's one of the more fun aspects of being part of this growing Buccaneers fandom community where we get to talk to each other, which has been super, super duper fun. Well, guys, coming up next is going to be our top 3 segment, so don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Right now, for you, the Pewtercast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to check out their service. This is a great way to check out Jason Vuic's book, all about the history of our beloved Buccaneers, the good and the bad. The Yucks tells the story of how Tampa was awarded an NFL expansion team in 1974, and the trials and tribulations, and eventually the victories that marked those early years. It's a Hollywood-type story that you don't want to miss. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/thepewtercast. Again, that's audibletrial.com/thepewtercast for your free audiobook. Welcome back to the Pewtercast. You're listening to episode 40, Yucking It Up. And for today's top 3, we're jumping off of something that we talked a little bit about in our conversation with Jason Vuic, and talk about maybe some of the lesser known, dare we say, the unsung heroes of the Yucks. So that's what we're going to be doing specific to our Creamsicle Days, Ren, our top 3 unsung heroes of the Creamsicle Days. Now, before we get to our criteria and our lists, I need to give a huge shout out to our listeners, to you guys that interact with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and the various media outlets out there. We had kind of put out to the Twitter followers and the Facebook people. We asked you guys about some of the unsung heroes, and you guys really showed up and answered the call and helped us kind of jog our memory and see what you guys remember about those days. So now I'm going to do my best to kind of shout out to those who responded as we run across yours. But if I happen to miss your name, please know there was just a lot of you guys who responded, and I'm probably not going to get to everybody. But truly, I want to say thank you to everybody who responded. It was super fun to be following that thread and interacting with you guys there. Probably we'll do something like that similar again in the future. But for right now, Ren, I'm going to bow to your expertise and ask you, what criteria did you use in picking your list of unsung heroes, and who is your number 3?
Those teams were so terrible. It's really hard to, and I was so young. I didn't really start to really understand Bucs and the Bucs players till like 78, to be honest. I was around for those teams. Like I said, we had season tickets, but I wasn't actually going to games. So probably like 78 for sure. So I kept my criteria to the creamsicle Bucs. Some of the guys that, I'd like to see maybe get a monument in Monument Park that I said that the Buccaneers should put outside the new indoor facility. Players like that. I do have a few of the Yucks, I guess, but I mostly kept it to players that played their whole career in the creamsicle. Like Jason said, if you really want to talk about the dark days of the Buccaneers, look at the 80s, and that was pretty much the creamsicle era.
Right.
So my number 3, I've talked about him before in the Ring of Honor episode, but my number 3 would be Hugh Green, linebacker at Pittsburgh. Played very well for us, made some Pro Bowls for us. He was sort of my favorite player after the Doug Williams era. Leroy Selman's always in that conversation, but it's almost like a given. It's like, who's your favorite Buccaneer? Jameis Winston. Okay, besides Jameis Winston,
Right.
Everyone can say Jameis Winston is their favorite Buccaneer, and rightfully so. So besides during that 80s stretch where they went 2-14 for 4 years in a row. In the book, Jason said they lost 10 games for 6 years in a row. Hugh Green was sort of like the standout player to me, and it was just being young, sort of those kitschy things that fans do and you get to be a part of mean a lot to you. And every time he would make a tackle, the PA announcer would be like, I number 53 on the tackle, Hugh Green. Everyone would chant Hugh, and inevitably the guy who was ever doing the game for TV or radio would say, they're not booing, folks, they're saying Hugh. So it was just a cool thing. And so for number 3, an unsung Buccaneer, I do think he'll get in the Ring of Honor eventually, but is number 53, Hugh Green.
Well, there you go, Hugh Green. I wish I could say more about him, Ren, but I never watched any of those years, so I'm sure
I feel
great.
a lot of this. I feel a lot of this top 3 is going to kind of go like that.
Probably like that. But for that, because I enlisted some help, a couple other people who threw out Hugh Green. I'll just throw that out there. Our friend from over at What the Buck, Derek Fournier, he said Hugh Green when he answered this question. And then if you remember, we had a guy who emailed us in a couple episodes ago after the Ring of Honor episode, Greg Francis.
Muehlner.
Yeah, dude, I need you to email me and let me know how to pronounce your name because I want to say it right. But I'm going to go with Greg for right now. He actually also said Hugh Green. He gave us a list of a couple different people, and Hugh was one of his on that list. So super fun there.
Yeah. So who do you got as 3?
Yeah, well, first my criteria that I had. When I was looking through the list that people sent in and looking through the names that you've mentioned before in the past and the names that Jason has mentioned and the names that I've heard out there, just names you hear as a Bucs fan of kind of the history. I looked for those that you don't really hear very often. And after doing a little bit of research or learning a little bit more about him, it's made me go, why don't I hear about that person more often? Because it seems like I should. Like, that was kind of the litmus test. The other thing is that, like, we all know Leroy Selman, right? And basically anyone who's in the Ring of Honor already, like Paul Gruber, Jimmy Giles, those guys, I kind of left them off the list because those are the sung heroes, and these are supposed to be the top 3 unsung heroes. So I kind of put them in the penalty box and tried to stay away from even maybe some of the guys that we talked about of who should be in the Ring of Honor in the future, because we've kind of already talked about those guys a little bit. So like a James Wilder, Ricky Bell, those guys kind of not so much. I sort of set them off to the side when I was trying to choose my list. Now, that said, I'm not really sure about my number 3. I know we talked about him. I just don't remember in what context. So I might already be violating my criteria with my very first pick here. But my number 3 is a guy who I think this guy in particular, actually all 3 of these guys, I think would be great, like, side characters if that movie ever does come about. Like they'd be the character types around the main people on screen. So for me, I'm going with Richard Batman Wood. Because who doesn't love a guy who draws Batman symbols on his elbow pads and knee pads? And, but this guy, we've talked about him. Like I said, I don't really remember where he fell in our conversation, whether we said he was a future Ring of Honor guy or he was just a guy we were talking about. But
I think he was an unsung. I think it was one of the guys I wanted to bring up that will probably never make it, but deserves a little shout out and some love.
Right. Yeah, that's maybe an honorable mention or something. But, listening to kind of his story and reading, his story through the Yucks and various things, this guy was a great player. Just a guy who probably doesn't get enough mentions or memories. And so my number 3 is Richard Batman Wood.
Yeah, good pick. And for all the reasons you mentioned, I would like to be able to find out if he is a comic book lover as much as, Gerald McCoy is. Could you equate him like Richard Batman Wood was Gerald McCoy before Gerald McCoy? Just as far as like comic book lover type of things, because it's well known that Gerald McCoy's favorite comic book character is Batman. He said it on a Super Bowl pregame show and busted out his keychain that had the Bat symbol on it. So, but yeah, Richard Batman Wood, he was one of those guys I knew growing up and going to games as well. And at the time, there were no superhero movies and things. You kind of only really knew Batman. I mean, this is before the Michael Keaton Batman came out.
Right.
So you only really knew Batman from, the Adam West Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you were a comic book, reader. That was kind of like how you only knew of him. So it was always cool to see the bat signal, I guess, or the bat symbol, if you want to, on his elbow pads. And yeah, he was a good player and he was fun to watch.
Yeah.
So my number 2, I also, which I really didn't mention, I've been banging the drum for James Wilder, I feel like, for every episode for the past 3 or 4 episodes. So I left him off the list. Everyone knows how I feel about that.
Hey, by the way, just because you've started talking about James Wilder so much, I have started noticing his name in more and more places over this last month. I've noticed him come up in articles. He's come up in tweets from like Scott Smith has put some stuff out from Buccaneers.com and different, and they've mentioned him in various places. Like, oh, hey, look, James. Oh, hey, look, there's James. Oh, hey, look, there's James Wilder. So, good. You are at least having a positive impact on your co-host here, to recognize a guy like that. And anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, Scott Reynolds from Pewter Report just did a Fab Five, and his front page was all about James Wilder. So if you want to learn about him, look that up. It's a good read, and it really shows what a workhorse and what a valuable player he was. And since we're on him, Ring of Honor next year. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Also like David Logan, I didn't really want to talk about, but I think it's a great story because, like I said, we're kind of doing unsung heroes. So I went with, for my number 2, my first ever draft pick that I actually remember being drafted. The NFL draft wasn't what it is today. Like, I don't even know if it was televised back when this guy was drafted. but it definitely was not the 3-day event that it has turned into, where people do live podcasts from and talk about each draft pick. I picked Ron Holmes. He was a defensive tackle out of Washington. He was no Leroy Selman. He was no Gerald McCoy. But he stuck around the Bucs for a long time. We had a recent sort of string of busts, and we didn't have a lot of picks. So it was like there was like Bo Jackson, and obviously everyone knows he didn't sign with the Bucs. And then we got a guy like in the 31st round. I might be getting my things mixed up. Like, I think Ron Holmes before Bo Jackson, but there was that Testaverde, Bo Jackson, all those type of players that didn't sort of pan out for the Bucs, and he played most of his career, if not all, for the Buccaneers. He was just a solid player, even though he was a first-round draft pick. But me as a kid, I remember exactly where I was. I was on a way to a field trip in a car with some of my classmates, and I heard it over the radio that the Bucs, with their first pick, selected Ron Holmes, and I actually knew who he was because I was sort of paying attention to the radio and the newspaper, and his name was being floated around a lot. So as my second unsung hero, purely for nostalgia's sake, is that I've taken Ron Holmes, number 90, defensive end.
All right. I bet he was really good to watch.
Yeah, he was okay. I mean, he started for a lot of years, but didn't sort of pan out as a first rounder. Like I said, it's a nostalgia pick for me.
Sure. Well, I will say I'm quickly scrolling through some of the answers that people sent us, and you are the only person to bring up that particular name. So
yeah.
But cool. All right. So we'll look at that. My number 2 is a guy that, all right, I got to be honest. I did not know this guy. I'd never heard of this guy before. But after, and even like I heard of him in the book while I was reading the book, but it wasn't until actually our conversation with Jason where I really became convinced of a guy named David Pear.
Mm-hmm.
Who, this is a guy that we as Bucs fans really should be honoring. This was a guy that embodied a nastiness, hard work ethic, truly a great player. This was a guy who, when the team won, it was partly because of him. They didn't lose because of him, if that makes sense. He's just a guy, and like I wish I had more information on this guy. I wish that I remembered more, or that I even knew more. But just from listening, just from being able to talk to these guys, I feel like David Pear is a guy who is completely an unsung hero.
I'm right there with you. I actually had him on my list, but being a lifelong Bucs fan, and you didn't jump on till the Pewter and Red days. Mm-hmm. I figured that you would go with Dave Pear because Jason did talk so highly of him during the interview, and it affected me too because I actually did some research on Dave Pear and sort of see where he is now and what happened with his career after the Buccaneers. But as you heard him say, Jason, I should say you heard him talk about in the interview, he was the first Pro Bowler. The first guy from the Buccaneers ever to be elected to a Pro Bowl, and that was before Leroy Selman. Leroy Selman was hurt for most of that year. And like you said, everyone knew Leroy Selman was going to be great. But, Dave Pear was his guy. And not only that, he was, from what I've read, he seemed to be banging the drum for, like, the concussion issue way before it's become, this almost underlying theme. Like it's almost to the point where you hear the word NFL, and one of the first things you think of in your mind is, like, concussions. A lot of players are dipping out early at their 30s. They're not getting their third contracts. The superstars, I should say, sort of like Calvin Johnson a couple years ago. He was only 30 years old, and he's like, nope, I'm good. I don't want to play anymore. And also how players were getting addicted to painkillers during his playing days. Sort of like you sort of saw that theme in that movie with Pacino, Any Given Sunday. There was a storyline or a thread, if you will, throughout that movie about painkillers and players becoming addicted to it. Everyone probably knows the story about how Brett Favre early in his career became addicted to painkillers. Right. And, this was going on back in, the early 70s. And Dave Pear has also been banging the drum for that for a long time. So really interesting guy. I picked him too. So, that's a really good pick. Pick up the book. There's some good stories in there about him. Yeah. So Dave Pear.
Yeah, and just to be fair, just like your number 2, actually nobody that I'm seeing here suggested him as one of the people. So I think it's a little bit of a shame. And would love to see him kind of be one of those unsung heroes. We learn a little bit more about.
I think if this question was asked after the episode had been put out or the people have listened to it. I think his name would come up all the time because, we talk about what a lifelong fan I've been, and I can name off, some players that maybe 85-90% of Buccaneers fans don't remember. Not like a media guy, but, as far as just like straight fan base, I feel confident that, 90% of people couldn't name as many players as I could back in the creamsicle days, especially the early creamsicle days. And I hadn't heard of him, but when I read the book, and once again, I think that he's going to sort of become, when you want to look clever at the dinner party and the conversation for the Bucs come up, I believe Dave Pear was our first Pro Bowler to come out. You're gonna, maybe as we get older, we'll start hearing that start to float around. But I really like that pick. For number 1, though, it's a dual pick for me. One because he won. No, it's just one person, but 2 reasons why I picked him. Gotcha. He won the Heisman Trophy at the college football team that I follow, and then he came back as the head coach of that. Then he came back as a head coach and won a national championship with the team there. And sort of like a polarizing figure. And the old ball coach, Steve Spurrier, who was the Buccaneers quarterback, the first year of their existence. Right. And he got beat to death. The offense was terrible. The offensive line was terrible. And but, he was a Florida guy. And he was the first ever quarterback for my team. Won the Heisman Trophy for the Florida Gators, came back and won a national championship as a coach for the Florida Gators. So sort of as a homer pick, if you may call it, an unsung yuck, definitely an unsung yuck. I'm going to go with Steve Spurrier.
I will tell you right now, once again, nobody else put that name down that I can see throughout the deal. Yeah, I don't... I'm going to go ahead and call this your homer pick, and I'll give it to you just because of that. I remember having the distinct impression as I was reading the book, and of course, talking a lot about Steve Spurrier and what that first year, because he was only with the team the 1 year. He stood in there and he did what he needed to do, but at the same time, there's a reason he didn't come back for the next year. That the Bucs moved on from him for that next year. And I'm going to stop talking there because I was not around and I don't know what all the details of that were. So I just remember that being an impression of going, oh, they moved on in the second year. Did some different things. So, I'm sure that's a really good pick. So,
thanks.
There you go.
I'm going to defend that pick by saying they wanted to go younger. That's what
they absolutely did, and that actually is a big point of the book of what was the game plan, because Hugh Culverhouse, John McKay had a plan of what they wanted, and they went through the expansion draft. They got a bunch of these old guys. They didn't want them. It's just what they needed to start with, and they really were looking at bringing up their own guys, and Steve Spurrier was one of those kind of placeholders until they could get their own guy. So, and I guess that would qualify as an unsung hero because that's a tough spot to be in, real super tough spot to be in. But for my number 1, I'm going to a guy, I kind of actually mentioned this in the interview with Jason This is a guy that to me has really piqued my interest since reading this book, since learning a little bit more about him. I actually didn't even know that this guy existed until reading this book. And it may just be the way that Vuic wrote about him, but I'm talking about Leroy Selman's brother, Dewey Selman. This guy, Jason said, Leroy's the kind of guy that would knock you on your ass and then put down a hand and help you back up. Dewey was the guy that would knock you on your ass and then step on you as he was walking away. Like, he was just nasty. He was hard hitting. This guy played lights out, played his guts out. And he was pretty much there from the beginning. And I think he just kind of often gets lost in the shadow of his brother. But man, I can imagine what this guy would have been like. He must have been a lot of fun to watch. He must have been one of those guys you say, I'm glad he's playing for us and not the other team right now. So for that reason, I've got Dewey Selman topping my list in the number one spot as an unsung hero for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I think that was probably my favorite little blurb in the whole entire book, when Jason was trying to get across to the readers about how good that Buccaneers defense really was. Even though they were losing all these games, they were one of the top, and I think he even says in the interview, like, one of the best defense of all time. And then
they were, yeah.
Yeah, as you're reading, like, they keep losing these games, but they're losing like 13-10. And the team punted like 11 times. So, I mean, they're just constantly out there stopping the team over and over and over again. And the quarterback would throw 2 picks. So, always constantly in the hole. But when he was getting the point across about how good and ferocious defense was, how he told the story where Dewey Selman tackled somebody and he hit him so hard that the refs threw a personal foul on the entire defense. Like they call the penalty like personal foul, the whole entire defense. You guys are just beating these guys up too bad. And that was it was almost like he hit him so hard, it was like, that can't be legal. I have to throw a flag. Like, you wrecked that guy so bad.
Right.
A lot of people like to talk about the Scott Brantley hit on Eric Hipple, which is, agreed. It's pretty terrible, but I would be willing to bet that Dewey Selman hit that Jason Vuic's talking about was right up there as well. So, and he also piqued my interest when I was even though I did know about Dewey Selman, it seems like he was a much more bigger part of that defense than I remember before I read the book.
And I would venture to say, just from hearing about Bucs history from people who have been around, that a lot of people probably don't remember him being as big of a part as he really was. So, Dewey Selman, very fun. And that raises the question, if Dewey Selman were to one day be a Ring of Honor guy, would we just, kind of put a star up next to Leroy Selman's name and let that be, or would he get his own? Would we have 2 Selmans around the ring? I'm not really sure. But it'd be interesting to see how that would go. Well, Ren, this is normally the part where we would do honorable mentions. But it kind of, instead of doing honorable mentions, I thought we'd kind of go to Facebook and we'd allow the names that people threw out there to serve as our honorable mentions for tonight. So a couple of the other names that got thrown out there, our guest actually from last week, Jay McElroy, he said number 42, Mr. Bell. I assume that means Ricky Bell.
It does.
Yeah, and he says, although he doesn't quite qualify as unsung, he wasn't on the short list. So I said, okay, fair enough. Let's hear. Keith Larson says Mark Cotney, who's a guy that I believe we talked about quite a bit in the book. He actually backed me up on Richard Batman Wood. Cheryl Stewart went with, she said, my dad loved Dewey. He was the meaner and dirtier of the brothers. Robert Hill said Hardy Nickerson.
Dirtier.
Yeah, dirty.
Ooh, Hardy, good choice.
Yeah,
not
Hardy.
Yuck, but for sure for creamsicle.
Yeah. Let's hear it. Mark Carrier, Robert Hill says. Derek Fournier said Hugh Green, Dave Logan, and Jerry Eckwood. Threw those names out there.
Jerry Eckwood. He was a running back. I remember him too. He was sort of in the Batman Wood team era, I guess, because as a kid I would always get those names kind of mixed up in my head, because Batman Wood, Jerry Eckwood. I knew who the players were, but for some reason, it would always take me a second to make sure to know exactly who the person was talking about or what went on. But yeah, I remember Jerry Eckwood. He was serviceable. I liked him. He wasn't, like you said with David Pear, he wasn't the reason the team was losing.
Right. Let's hear. Moving on. Mike Schreiner says Ricky Bell and Paul Gruber. Ricky Bell, by the way, being in the Ring of Honor or Crew of Honor for Old Tampa Stadium. Paul Gruber actually currently in our current Ring of Honor. Let's hear. Steve Lamarck said Ron Hall.
I was going to say Ron Hall. I scratched him out.
Yeah.
I thought he'd be a little too obscure. He was just one of my favorite players, tight end.
Yeah.
He kind of was he was Cameron Brate before Cameron Brate. The guy that always seemed to get down the field. I think he was from the University of Hawaii, but his hands were like he didn't drop anything. So yeah, that's why I liked him. He came from like a weird school and just didn't drop anything.
There you go. Paul Swain says the throwing Samoan Jack Thompson.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No.
No. Robert Hill says Lonnie Mance or Charles Dimry.
I don't know either of those.
Yeah.
So they would fall into the 10% that know more about the Creamsicle Bucs and name players than I do. I don't know who either of those people are.
Yeah. Let's hear. Craig Kurtzman, I believe that is our Vegas Craig from Las Vegas, said the Sandman Broderick Thomas and Kevin House. Threw those couple names out there.
Kevin House for sure. Broderick Thomas was a first-round draft pick. Kind of disappointing, but once again, he sort of played on a terrible defensive roster, so it wasn't totally his fault. But yeah, I do remember that Broderick Thomas.
Yeah. Nick Anderson says Richard Batman Wood. Mark Carrier. Eric Reynolds says Paul Gruber, who Cheryl points out he's already in the Ring of Honor. Let's hear. Frank Chatra says David Logan. Donald
Igwe BK?
Yeah, that guy right there. Iggy.
Iggy.
Let's hear Steve DeBerg, although he didn't spend his entire career as a Buck. Vinny Testaverde, just saying he deserves a mention. Charlie Hanna, Barrett Rudd, or some of the names he threw out.
Barrett Rude.
Barrett Rude. Oh, yeah, Rude. Yeah. Our friend Greg Francis, along with Hugh Green, he also said Mark Carrier, Tony Mayberry, Hardy Nickerson, Kevin House, Brad Culpepper. And then Me Sador finishes up saying Hardy was a beast. So there's a few honorable mentions, maybe more than a few. And shout out again, thank you to everybody who responded, whether it was Twitter, on Facebook, maybe even you emailed in some names. And if I didn't read your name out or didn't give you a direct name shout out, I apologize. But thank you as well for sure. You helped make this segment really great, and it was just fun getting to interact with you guys. Well, guys, now we'd like to know how your picks stack up against our picks. You can let us know on Twitter at ThePewterCast or on Facebook.com/ThePewterCast, or send us an email to ThePewterCast@gmail.com. Ren, before we get out of here, why don't we take a look at this week's poll?
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll. Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, well, Ren, this was a fun poll this week. I think this one will go down in history as being the one that had I don't know if it was the most responses, but it was some of the most responses. One of the highest ones people participated in. We asked a real simple question: which Bucs uniform was your favorite? Did you like the creamsicle orange? Did you like the original, that 90s pewter and red? Or how about the current reflective alarm clock looking uniforms that we have today? So Ren, before we reveal who answered or who won, what do you think about this? Which one's your personal favorite uniform that the Bucs have?
I think I'm going to be definitely in a minority on this one, but it's sort of a nostalgia show, and even though I despise the winking part of Bucko Bruce, which is talked about in the interview, was supposed to be a snarl, almost supposed to be like more of a Popeye, as a grrr.
Yeah, just not. It was the Pink Castle at Disney. Just not done well. Good on paper, just not done well.
I don't understand what the Pink Castle at Disney is.
So in the late 90s, they had their 25th anniversary, and they decided to magically transform the castle into a birthday cake for the 25th anniversary of Walt Disney World. And like when you see the drawings and the concept, it looks really cool. But when they actually did it, it was a big bottle of Pepto-Bismol. And it was horrible. It just didn't work out in reality. Cool in idea, just didn't work out in reality. I think that was kind of the same thing with Bucco Bruce. Really cool idea on paper with the wink and the snarl, and you kind of have a French flair to him because that's what a Buccaneer was, and various things. But it doesn't age well. Let's put it that way.
It does not age well. But I'm also a firm believer that there's really no ugly uniforms. Ugly uniforms are only for teams that are bad. But when if you're a good team and definitely a dominant team, your colors or your color scheme or uniforms, they sort of become intimidating, and they're kind of tough no matter what they look like. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, for most of the Bucco Bruce years, this did not exist at all for the Buccaneers. But like I said, it's a nostalgia show, and I remember before the Bucs, or not the Bucs, the NFL went to the one shell league, the one helmet rule.
Right.
That the Josh Freeman Buccaneers got to did a throwback game in those jerseys, and with the updated cuts of the uniform and the updated face mask, the colors were still there. I thought I really, really missed those. I remember watching that game and thought how great they looked. Mm-hmm. So I went with the Bucco Bruce creamsicle orange.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I look at those and I just don't like them. I know there's a lot of people who do, but that's not the era I came up in. It's like I don't like bell-bottom pants either. Like, it's just not the era I came up in. I personally, I want to say my favorite is the original pewter and red. Personally, though I've really come to like the new ones, even as hard as the numbers can be to read. Sometimes I really like the new ones. I think they look kind of cool. They look modern, and we're the only team in the NFL that does it like that. But a couple other people, Chef Aaron says the Color Rush jerseys designed by Samer Ali, which, guys, if you haven't seen those are awesome.
Which ones are you talking about?
Every one of them, even the creamsicle ones, those are awesome. Hey, listen, I'm just going to throw this out there. I haven't figured out who it is yet. I've been trying to find out. But, hey, guys, listen. I think if we as a fandom come together and we start writing letters, we could get Samer's one of his uniforms to be the Color Rush jersey. I think we've got to write somebody at Nike. I don't know who that is. If anybody could track that down, who do we need to write that we can rally all of Bucs fandom to say, pick this guy's. The red ones are fine. We've used them. They're old. Pick this guy's, one of his designs, and make those as uniforms. That'd be awesome. But so shout out to Samer by Chef Aaron. At JTHV says he liked them all, but he went with the pewter and red, although he likes the new ones. Let's see here. Who else do we have out there? Greg says overall he likes the pewter and red better, but he likes the current logo better than that one.
I likes the bigger logo.
Yeah. Your friends over at the Pewter Plank, this would be Mr. James Yarko, says he voted for the original pewter and red. That one being said, the new ones really grew on him pretty quick, and he likes them quite a bit. That seems to be the general consensus. Jay Smith says the new ones have grown on him big time, but he's still a huge fan of the creamsicle throwbacks and wish we could get them at least once a year. As long as we can change the helmet, that would be good. I would agree with you on that. Mike says he's not a fan of the font when it first came out, but now he wouldn't have it any other way. So those are some of the responses. As far as who actually won the poll, let's get to that. Big drum roll, please. Yeah, no, we don't have sound effects on this show. With 55% of the vote, the original pewter and red wins the day. With your creamsicle orange ones coming in at 30% therein, which leaves 15% for the reflective alarm clock, kind of coming in dead last for the current ones. So with that said, that is our poll. Thank you to everybody who voted in that. Super, super duper fun. Well, guys, that's going to do it for this segment. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with your emails, comments, and questions. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Pewtercast fans, I just wanted to take this moment to say thank you to everyone who has been supporting the show. Whether you've taken the time to leave us an iTunes review, which helps new listeners find us, or you've sent us an email, you've tweeted us, or left us a comment on Facebook, we love interacting with you, our listeners. Or perhaps you've gone the extra step in helping the show out financially by leaving a one-time donation at paypal.me/thepewtercast. Every dollar goes back into making this show the best possible Buccaneers podcast out there. So in whatever way you've chosen to support the show, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And we're back. This is episode 40, Yucking It Up. And it's time for your emails, your comments, and your questions, your interactions with us. This is our new favorite segment. I think we say that every week. Really because it is, Ren, you know?
Yeah, it is.
So, well, to start us out today, we have a new iTunes review. So, woot woot. I feel like I should have like a sound effect to play every time we get a iTunes review. Like, that's it's fun. This one comes in at 5 stars. By somebody whose name is I Have 3 Cats. That's what they put their name as. Titled it Fun and Unique Show. They say that Brent and Ren are so much fun. There is no Bucs podcast out there like the Pewtercast. Thank you very much. The main segment is always pertinent to what's going on with the team. In my opinion, Brent and Ren always seem to be ahead of the podcast information curve.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
True, I guess. Yeah.
You think so? I don't know, but okay, cool. I'll go with it. The top 3 is my favorite segment because I think it's fun to see if my 3 matches with theirs. I usually listen while doing housework, and the episodes usually last me for a day or two, which I love. Hope that I get to hear this review in the next interaction segment. I'm a fan of hearing what other Bucs fans have to say and really like it when they do their own top 3 lists. Thank you so much for making folding laundry not such a chore. 5 stars. iTunes review. What do you think about that, Ren?
Yeah, hit all the points, huh? Thank you very much. That's kind of what we strive for, and this is kind of why have become our favorite segment, is where we get to talk to the listeners. Yeah. And you know, I Have 3 Cats hit it on the head with kind of sort of all the things we're trying to do. So thank you very much. Thank you for the 5 stars, and keep listening. We'll keep talking.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna just echo everything that Ren said there. For I Have 3 Cats. I don't have any cats personally. I have a dog and a fish, and 2 children, which is enough pets. So,
nice.
Oh, they're fun. The good news is you can take them all out and walk them at the same time, which is good. Let them use the bathroom in the yard.
Yeah, who carries the fish?
Yeah, we're gonna move on. iTunes reviews. Hey, listen, guys, send us iTunes reviews. Go over to iTunes, even if you're not an iTunes podcast app user. If you if you're listening to us on YouTube or maybe iHeartRadio, maybe Podbean, maybe Overcast, Jabbercast, Podcast Addict. Any of those podcast shows, what's the other one? Google Play Music. If you listen to us on Google Play Music, however you listen to us, if it's not iTunes, just go over to iTunes, like create yourself a little account, go over to iTunes, leave us a review.
Create yourself an account.
Good. Create a little account, leave a little review, and then go back to listening to however you want to. Because what happens is that actually gets us up in the ratings. Did you know right now, if you type in the letters PEWT, we become the very first one that pops up in the search bar for iTunes, which is very cool. And we're in there. If you type in Bucs or something like that, we wind up in there as well. So the more reviews we have, the more positive reviews we have, the just easier it gets to people when they start looking for Bucs coverage, Bucs podcast. Because I personally think once the season gets started, Ren, there's going to be a lot of people out there who don't currently listen to podcasts, or at least Buccaneers podcast, who are going to kind of jump in and see what's out there. And we want to make sure that they can also find the Pewtercast while they're doing that. So go leave us an iTunes review. And if there's anywhere else that takes reviews, leave them. We'd love to know what they are, and do it there as well. So with that, again, thank you again. I have 3 cats. Ren, you had something on Twitter that you wanted to take care of today with a listener?
Oh, yeah. At the beginning of the show, I talked about how I'd written that article, how Jason Light has flipped the roster in just 4 years by 92%. There's only 7 players from that 2013 90-man roster still on the Buccaneers. And with the news coming out today that the Carolina Panthers fired their GM,
Right.
Greg Aubin, fan of the show. There's his shout out since he didn't ruin it for everybody. He was sort of looking into since when the Carolina GM took over and the Buccaneers, how many people had still been on it. It just sort of fell into the article that I had just written. And I guess the guy who was just let go still has 13 players on the roster this year. And like I said before, there's only 7 from the year before Jason Light got there. And so I was like, okay, I'll give a shout out on the show, on the Petercast, recording tonight, whoever can name the 7 players that were on the 2013 90-man roster. And Superfan in Jameis We Trust at TB_Bucs fan, I think I was like 30 seconons later, it was like, boom. And it didn't take long at all. And he nailed them, nailed all 7.
And who are the 7?
I knew you were going to make me do this. Okay. Doug Martin, Gerald McCoy, Levante David, Will Golston, Luke Stocker, Keith Tandy.
I got this one. Yeah, there's Dotson. Yeah, I was going to say, I know this one. Okay. All right. One more pop quiz. Name the 7 dwarves from Disney's Snow White.
Sleepy, Sneezy, Doc, Happy, Bashful, Grumpy, Dopey. There you go.
Good job. All right. Which one of
Huron,
those guys?
Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. What? So anyway, shout out to TB_ Bucs fan, or as some of you might know him, in Jameis We Trust, I think it is.
Yeah.
So for getting that in so quick, I mean, he had it in so fast. I probably only 4 or 5 people might even saw the tweet before he had it in. So there's your shout out and good job. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. In Jameis We Trust at TB Buccaneers _ something or other in there. He's one we can almost usually count on for some sort of a reply or some sort of a response.
Big fan of the show.
Yeah. So definitely appreciate your support and glad you got the shout out for that. Ren, you should do that more often. I like it when you do that. So we had that. Now, coming out of our interview with Jason, Ren, you and I were kind of tossing back and forth a question, and we threw this out there for people to ask them what was like your biggest facepalm moment as a Buccaneers fan that just kind of something happened and you just kind of went, that's my Buccaneers, but you stayed a fan. Like you're just like, yeah, it's just what it is to be a Bucs fan when shit like that happens right there. So, we got quite a few responses back in on that. Was asking for specific things, and a couple people put out there. Josh Owens sent us in. He said the Levante hit that was out of bounds at the end of Week 1 versus the Jets in 2013 that put them in position for a game-winning field goal, and we lost to Geno Smith.
Ruined the whole season.
Yeah,
that ruined the whole season. We would have went to the playoffs that year if it wasn't for that. Obviously, I'm kidding, but yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was definitely a facepalm moment, and for somebody like we had sort of counted on as like a really good player. Like he might have been like our best defensive player at the time. Either him or Gerald McCoy. And it was just like, what are you doing? He was so far out of bounds. Yes, I remember that.
Right. Speaking of our friend in Jameis We Trust, he said the Rams lost. I'm assuming he's meaning from this last year. He said he's so salty over the freaking Rams loss. Though that may apply to the last couple of years. Cause man, or
the 79 championship game.
Yeah.
Or when Sean King, Tony Dungy led Bucs went in and lost 9-11 or something.
Hey, listen, we turned it around against Philadelphia. Let's turn it around against the Rams. Let's do that. So, Let's hear. Our friend Scott says the Ravens game when Joey Flacco had 5 touchdowns before halftime.
That was bad.
That's our Bucs. Let's hear. Robert Walker sent in, said, how about the first quarter of the home game against Green Bay in 91? Now, I don't know about this. Ren, do you know what he's talking about?
One of my, I thought it was the first half. We might be talking about different games, but it's about the right timeline. I remember the Bucs were down 49-0 at halftime to the Packers, but I thought it was a road game. I thought it was in Green Bay.
Uh-huh.
But I'm just pulling everything from memory. I haven't done any research or anything. Nor, like I said, we could be talking about 2 different games, but that was when we sort of posed that question. That was one of the first things that popped into my head, and I believe that's still an NFL record. Mm-hmm. If that's what he's talking about, that a 49-0 deficit at halftime. So
yeah,
that's my Bucs.
Yeah, that's my Bucs. Our friend Javier from all the way down south, somewhere in Central America. What country was it? Panama? Is that
Panama.
Yeah. Our friend Javier says the 41-14 loss to the Jags is right up there. 41 unanswered points to a Blaine Gabbert offense.
I forgot about that one.
Ouch.
I forgot about the 41 unanswered.
Yeah. We had a lot of people say any game that Lovie Smith coached, and I always kind of went back to him and I was like, I need something more specific. Someone off the edge actually went even further and said, just see the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. So, just like Vuic said during the interview, just look at the 80s.
Yeah. So, hey, listen. Even Dirk Cutter gets a facepalm moment in here. Our friend Andrew Katzman says going for it on 4th and 43 last year gets a mention. Has to get a mention. So. And then not taking a timeout on the final drive of the Rams game that would have given us an extra play.
I defended that when it happened, and I'm still defending it today. I thought his thought process was correct. Jameis just overthrew the ball. If people don't exactly remember what Cutter's response was to that, because during the offseason he had hired someone to basically be the clock manager. So when it gets down to these situations in the game, as Dirk's trying to, look at plays and keep the drive going and that type of thing, there's a guy specifically that sort of figures out when to call a timeout and, and what's going on to sort of help Dirk in that to preserve the clock the best way possible for the team. And, Dirk even said after the game, that guy was, screaming in his ear, call timeout, call timeout, call timeout. But he said that he thought the Rams defense was tired and we could get him over the top. And he was. I mean, Vincent Jackson was 3 yards past the cornerback in the corner of the end zone, and Jameis just put it in the first row. It was his instincts were right. Now, unfortunately, it's hard to explain that to people when, it's not 4th down.
Right.
You still have timeouts left and you still have downs to go and the clock runs out and you're inside the 10-yard line. It's sort of hard to get past that. But listen, I still think it was the right move.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a different story if it worked. We'd be praising the balls and the risk it, no biscuit or whatever thing that Lady Light always says. The other side of that is if it doesn't work, then you got to eat it.
You get mentioned a face palming.
Yeah, exactly.
On a podcast.
So, being the fact that it didn't work, that's the other side, but it didn't work. So face palm moment and you go, that's my Bucs. We had a few people email in, the Egyptologist, emails in and just simply says hiring Lovie Smith sent from my iPhone. Very simple face palm moment for him. Or her, I don't know. What did you go back? I'm not talking. Put yourself in a moment of the Glazers just hired Lovie Smith. Forget the 2 seasons to follow. We hadn't gotten there yet. Like, go back in time to that moment. Was just the hiring of Lovie Smith in that moment a facepalm moment for you?
No, but I was disappointed. I understood it. Like when I first heard it, my initial reaction was, like I never thought as Lovie Smith as being a top tier coach in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's sort of hard to defend since he brought his team to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as a quarterback.
Right.
But he never sat right with me. But I understood like the Glazers wanting to bring back sort of a little piece of the Dungy era,
Right.
even though it didn't work out in the end for Tony Dungy. The coaching tree that came out of there, Mike Tomlin, Lovie Smith, Marvin Lewis, and I know I'm forgetting Herm Edwards. I mean, all these
Monty
guys
Kiffin and
but he didn't go on to be a head coach.
Yeah,
I mean,
but still.
Yeah, true. Agreed. Yeah. So, all these guys came were assistants on Tony Dungy's staff at one time or another. So I understood that sort of thinking to bring back, maybe it was almost also like a fan base move. The fans will get behind the coach because, it's the second coming of the Tony Dungy philosophy type of thing. But and off the bat, it was a little bit of disappointment. And maybe it's just me as a fan that likes somebody with more pizzazz, maybe a little more fire, when he talks to the press, because who knows how he talks to his team inside the locker room. I'm not there. But and then so I don't want to start getting into then this happened, that happened. But yeah, right away I was a little deflated. I wasn't mad or upset. It just, you as a fan and you have like a big spot open, you want to get like the best guy. And I can't remember who I thought the best guy was at the time. I just remember when it was Lovie Smith, I was kind of like, oh, all right, well, I see it. Okay, cool. We'll see what he does.
Yeah. Well, staying in that now. Okay, let me say this. My big thought about Lovie was, I think like everyone else, I understood. Hey, listen, we're trying to harken back to it yesteryear. My only problem with that is whenever you do that, you start looking backwards instead of looking forward. And I really wanted the Glazers to look forward. They were trying to pull something out of the past, and that's not what we needed. And so anyway, our friend Javier actually sent us an email as well, a little bit longer
cool.
form. He says, "Hola, amigos." Javier, I'll let you know if I did that accent correct. He said, "Here are some facepalm moments from recent memory. Keep in mind, I'm only 28 and I've been a fan since around 1998. So he and I high five. We were from the same era, and he wasn't a fan during the creamsicle era. So." For him, now in that, he says, week 3, the 2014 season, Tampa Bay versus Atlanta in Atlanta. Yike. He said, here comes our savior, Lovie Smith, and he's getting the band back together. We got new uniforms. We're going to play the Tampa 2 defense, and Lovie is a winner, right? Because he led his team to the Super Bowl, and he knows what he's doing. Nope. All of my hopes and dreams went out the window when I sat and watched the stinking Dirty Birds put a 50 burner against us. I really wanted to cry, but by this point, I don't recall if I did. I was a grown man who during all of my adult life had known nothing other than losing with this team, and he had reached his breaking point. I remember that. I remember that just going, ay. Yeah.
And don't forget the Tennessee game.
Yeah.
We're Tennessee ready, and it was.
Oh gosh,
it was gross.
Yeah.
You could sort of dismiss that as okay, 1 week, okay. You don't really know what you have as far as players. You think you do. He's an NFL head coach. He'll figure it out, regroup. But yes, alas, it did not. That did not happen.
Yeah, he says these facepalm moments are livid. He had a whole list of them, and for the sake of time, I won't go through them all. He says, but all these are facepalm moments that are livid in my memories because he looks to them differently. Just like Andy Dufresne, who crawled through a river of shit and came out clean on the other side in the Shawshank Redemption. We went through so many bad years of countless facepalm moments just to be right where we are now. We have a true franchise quarterback, an elite wide receiver, an elite middle linebacker, and perfect leadership from our head coach and general manager. From this point forward, things will only get better. Thanks for taking the time out to read all this. Feel free to proof me all you want. Keep up the good work, and go Bucs. Saludos. Javier, thank you so much for your email, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Yeah.
Pretty much spot on.
Pretty
everything
much.
he said.
Yeah.
You know?
It's hard to hate your past when you understand it's part of how you got to where you are today, when you're in a good spot today. So another email. This is actually our final one in this particular topic. David May is a good friend of the show who often emails in, says, "You guys are effing awesome. My facepalm moment was all the shit I talked to the boys fans about beating them in Dallas because the Bucs did it the year before. But the best part was them choking again at home in the playoffs." David from Utah, formerly in Oregon, sent from Yahoo Mail for iPhone. So yeah, I guess he's talking about talking a bunch of crap to Cowboys fans when we're going to beat them in Dallas, but we wound up choking and not doing that. But then watching Dallas choke at home in the playoffs just a couple weeks later.
Okay. I mean, I don't really remember what year that's from.
Oh, I think it was this past year. I think that's this past year when we went to Dallas. Remember, we had that big 5-game winning streak, and it ended in Dallas.
Yeah, but didn't he say we beat him the year before?
Because the Bucs did it the year before. Yeah, did we not go to? No, we didn't go to.
Not the yeah.
Did we beat Dallas? I don't remember. I don't think
we played Dallas.
Yeah,
Jameis's rookie year.
I don't know.
So it might be like a Dorsett, Leroy Selman era.
Maybe.
Or maybe, he just mistyped, or maybe you can't read. It's a lot of things.
It's getting late. All of that is possible.
Yeah, I do remember when Dallas used to own us back in the creamsicle days, and there was actually a game where Tony Dorsett ran for 108 yards, but like his longest carry was 9. Like the defense bottled him up. They just kept feeding him the ball, and once again we couldn't score. So,
right.
That game was when I started to really hate the Cowboys, because they used to blow us out. And this one we were sort of in it the whole time, and they still found a way just to grind out a win. And that's when my hatred for Tony Dorsett and Danny White and those guys started, which is still,
still there.
Thankfully
Still
last year. Now it's Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. So keeping the fire burning. Way to go, guys.
There you go. Well, to everybody who responded to the biggest facepalm moments, thank you for sending in your responses. Super fun. I got a couple emails here, Ren, just a handful to go through, not related to anything else, just ones that people have sent in. First one I'm going to go to is our friend Greg Pierce, who says, his play on the field coupled with his postings on social media, Quan has become not just a fan favorite, but one of my favorite players as well. Anyone who follows him on social media knows that he is always talking about playing and or getting ready to play football, improving, dominating, and basically always just being fired up. And I think it's the one reason why fans love him so much. My question is this. If he wasn't active on social media and he was more out of sight, out of mind, like perhaps Levante David, would fans still be as fired up about him? I'm just wondering if his play on the field is enough to get fans fired up about him, or if that would maybe subside a little bit if he wasn't as active on social media. I love the podcast, and go Bucs. So what do you think? What do you think about Quan? Would fans be as fired up about him if he wasn't as active on social media, you think?
I would have to say no. And not that fans wouldn't be fired up about him. I mean, because the season he had last year, and now going to his third year. I mean, he hasn't even played 2 full seasons yet. Remember, he didn't play the last 4 games of 2013. No, not 2013. 2015. So, yeah, he hasn't had 2 full seasons yet. Fans would be fired up about him. I can't wait. Yeah, I still think a lot of fans would be, this is going to be Quan's year. He's going to bust out. I still think fans would say, he's going to get, he's going to become sort of more of a national name because of Hard Knocks. Uh-huh. But just seeing him, like Greg said, working out at the gym in a full sweat at 2 a.m. He bought a jugs machine. I've seen him catching balls in his driveway the past 2 days. On Instagram, he's he's out there, and Jude's with him. Jude Ajay-Barima is out there with him too.
Right.
And they're out in the driveway doing quickness drills with their feet and taking passes from the jug machine because he didn't want to drive to One Buck anymore. So I can't really say that it would be more or less. Well, yeah, it'd have to be less, but not. But I don't think I don't think anyone's sleeping on him. Put it that way. It just gets you more fired up. If it's like saying, hey, we're going to beat Dolphins week 1, and then not talking about it till the week of the Dolphins game, or saying, hey, we're going to beat Dolphins week 1, then every 3 days come back with like a hype video. We're going to beat the Dolphins. We're going to be
right.
That's why I don't think anyone's sleeping on Quan. I don't think anyone doesn't think Quan's a very good player and thinks going to bust out this year. I think they would think that either way, but I just think more people talk about it and it comes up a lot more. Like, because who do we talk about? We talk about Quan all the time.
Right.
If Levante David did the same thing, we would probably be saying the same thing, but with a slightly different narrative, as in, he was great in Shiano years and kind of got lost in Lovie Smith's defense. But, he really did have a better year than people remember. He was just kind of overshadowed by Quan. But I really look for Levante David to have a big year this year, maybe even better than Quan, maybe like back his 2013 year. So I see what he's getting at. But like I said, I know I'm repeating myself, so I'll wrap it up. I just don't think anybody's sleeping on the guy.
Yeah. I mean, I follow Quan on social media, but I got to be honest, I don't he doesn't pop up in my timeline a super ton, so I don't necessarily see him as overly active on social media as Greg probably sees him. That might just be the way the algorithms work out or something. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I mean, it's that old idea, more media, more press is good press, right? I mean, if people see what somebody's doing, if somebody's getting ready, you remember how everybody freaked out when we saw that picture of Noah Spence over the summer?
Yeah.
And how much have we really talked about Noah Spence a lot since then? Well, we've not. I mean, you saw what one picture on social media sent up in just, I mean,
yeah.
People were writing article after article about this one picture. Like, imagine if we were continuing to get updates and pictures and little short training videos and stuff about what's going on with him. Then you look at a guy like Gerald McCoy, who Gerald McCoy often will post his 5 a.m. workout or his 1 a.m. workout or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily blow up. So, I think Quan is definitely riding on he's kind of part of this new era of Buccaneers hype, which is well-deserved, I think. But would we still be as fired up? Probably not. But I think, again, there's only so much that you can say for off-season workout. It's got to come down to what happens under the lights during those 16 weeks, 17 if you count the bye, during those 16 games. That's what's really going to get people fired up about a particular player. And then also, what the score is, because you can have a fantastic player, but if the score on the board at the end of the game isn't, in our favor, nobody's looking great. I don't care how well they were playing. So, speaking of Quan, did you see the picture of the tattoo he got on his back here recently?
Yeah, yes, I did. Sorry. Yeah, I did. I can't believe that was just finished. Like, that has to be something he's been working on for a while, and he just sort of unveiled it yesterday.
Right.
I mean, because that's a big piece.
Yeah.
That is a huge tat. So, yes, I did, though. It actually made the Bucs beat today. Casey Phillips reported on it. Yeah. So yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, cool tattoo. I think something that has kind of had me chuckling a little bit is people saying, "Oh, he's tagging himself as a Buccaneer for life," because the picture has him in his Bucs uniform. But if you look at it, it's a snapshot. It's like a picture that was taken from a particular moment in history that had nothing to do with him being in a Bucs uniform and more to do with his brother and what was going on with his brother, who unfortunately lost his life last year or 2 years ago, I guess now. And it's about kind of capturing that moment when things really came together in the Magic. And here's the thing. Regardless of what happens for Quan in the future, and I hope that Quan plays his entire career in Tampa Bay, but regardless of what happens, that moment will have always happened while he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and that's why that uniform is there. So, I don't know, that part's interesting, but I think it's a terrific way to honor a brother who unfortunately lost his life way too early. And man, it's a beautiful tattoo. It really is. The mural behind it and everything is real pretty. So Quan, expecting a big year out of him. Be super excited to see what happens there with Quan. Moving on, we got another email from a friend Evan. Real short, he says, "Hey guys, I love your show, and I wanted to know if you guys will be at the Stick Carrier Takeover Day. I'll be screaming my head off, and I'd love to meet you guys. Big fan, Evan." Stick Carrier Takeover Day coming up, Ren. We talked just very, very briefly at the very top of the show about being at the open practices. Of course, Stick Carrier Day being something that Justin Pulowski over at the Bucs Uncensored podcast is kind of pulling all of his people together to invade One Buck Place for practice on August 5th. Do you think you're going to be there?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to pick one day, like I said earlier, I'm going to try to go to all of them. And as right now, it looks like it, I'll be able to. But, if you're going to pick one day to go, that's the day to go. I mean, that's going to be the party. That's going to be, they're going to get those bleachers rocking. So, yeah, I'm going to be there for sure.
Yeah, I am. Derek Fournier over at What the Buck challenged me last year to get to, make the trip, come in from out of town, get to these days, because they're some of the few days that we're actually allowed to go as fans. And so I'm going to be making it down. That is one day that I will make it down for. We've got some fun stuff planned. We'll talk about on a future episode for that particular day. But yeah, I want to echo what Ren just said. Like, listen, guys. Listen, I don't care. Somebody put out a tweet earlier this week talking about, I don't know, it struck me as weird, and I kind of sent out a thing saying, listen, I don't care what tribe of Buccaneer fan you call yourself, whether you're a Buckaholic, whether you're a stick carrier, whether you're a pewterhead, whether you're I don't even know what all the tribes are out there. We're all Buccaneers fans. And you know what I've loved is that all of the leaders of these different tribes have all sort of said the same thing of we're going to unite as Bucs fans. So regardless of whether you call yourself a stick carrier or something different or not, I said, you can call me whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner, Yes. Hey, there you go. But I am, so I'm going to be there. That's just a day to go. And man, the organization seems pretty fired up about it. Definitely this large group of fans is going to be super fired up about it. And as Ren said, if you're going to pick a day to go to as many as you can, but if you're going to pick one, try to make it that one. There's something about when fans come together as a whole, and Justin's kind of led the way with this, with the Stick Carrier Takeover Day. He's led the way. So, we can all go to that one. That's a great one to go, and it's going to be a spectacle. I got to tell you, I got to imagine it's going to be a spectacle to behold. But Bucs fans unite all the way around, and it's kind of one of the hallmarks, I think, of this podcast of we like to, we're not partial to anybody. We like it all. We have our own personal druthers, I think, but hey, listen, get out there. That's the one to get to. So yes, Evan, Ren is going to be there. I am absolutely making it every possible thing that I can make happen to be there myself. So would love to meet you. Email us back. Let us know. Maybe we can hook up. Would love to hook up with anybody else who's out there at that time too.
Does he have a Twitter handle?
It's not in this email. So I'll email him back, try to get some information on him. It should be, hopefully we'll get connected with him. So should be fun. So let's see. We have that. We got one more email, and Ren, I bet you can't guess who this one's from.
Hey, Chef. Hey, kids. I did that backwards. Hey, Chef. Hey, kids.
Yes, it's our very good friend, Chef Aaron, who's actually bringing up something very, very important that I want to talk about. Super, super duper important, Ren. And we've got to figure out what all the details are, but now is the time to start talking about it. Chef Aaron says this. He says, "Hey, guys, I can't wait for the Pewtercast Fantasy Football League coming up."
Oh, that's right.
I was wondering if we could possibly do the draft on Saturday or Sunday or even Monday night last time he had to work. And the draft was going on, so his roster was automated. He didn't have that bad of a roster, but he did get riddled with injuries. Anyway, can the freaking season get here already? I'm ready for Buccaneers football. Sent from my iPhone. So Chef Aaron, go ahead.
I've met Aaron, and funny enough, that's exactly what he sounds like.
Well, there you go. We've talked to Aaron quite a few times. He calls into the Instant Cast shows, which you guys will be able to do coming up because that Instant Cast show is coming back. Talking Knox will use the Instant Cast platform, so that will be a live call-in show. You guys can call in for that show as well. Would love to hear from as many of you guys as we can, including Chef Aaron. And Chef Aaron, thanks for bringing up fantasy football. Hey, guys, listen, we did it last year. It was pretty awesome. It was a lot of fun. Pewtercast Fantasy Football League is coming up. If you want to be a part of that, here's the deal. It's going to be $10. We're going to ask you to pay $10 to get in. And what we'll do is we'll split the pot. Half of it will go to the winner. The other half will go to charity. And last year, actually wound up winning myself, which was really cool. Had never won fantasy football before in my life. And wound up just kind of donating the whole thing. We bought a whole bunch of peanut butter and donated it to a local food pantry. But $10, you just got to email me. Just email me to thepewtercast@gmail.com, and I will get you your invite sent over. We've got to create the league. And here's the deal. If we get enough people to sign up, we will actually create 2 leagues. Ren, we've not actually talked about this. Do you want to do that? I'll lead one, and you'll lead the other one.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, listen.
Of course. It's for charity. Yeah.
And if we get enough, we'll do 3 leagues, and I'll do 2. And if we get more than that, we'll do 4 leagues, and Ren will do 2. So hey, just listen. However many we get, as long as we get enough. But you guys email us in. There'll be 10 to 12 person leagues. So do that. We'll get
12. Make it 12.
Yeah, 12 is what we did last year. That worked out pretty well. So
10 person leagues. I mean, I know a lot of people like them, but all the teams just are too stacked.
Yeah.
Like you really have to, near the end, you really have to make some really good football decisions in 12 person leagues. 10 person leagues, everyone's got a freaking all pro team
plus an all pro bench. So that is very true. So we are definitely looking for the 12, but it just depends on how many people sign up for where we go with that. So that's what we're looking for. So you guys can do that right now. You can email us to thepewtercast@gmail.com. Just put fantasy football in the subject line. Say sign me up. You want to be a part of it, and we'll give you details on how you can be a part of that. Would love to have as many people be a part of that league because it's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun. It's another way that we get to connect as fans of a team, just something that we kind of get to rally around and do stuff together. So, and yes, Chef, we will do what we can to host the draft on a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, just really because you asked. I think last year it was just whatever kind of worked. So yeah. Well, Ren, that's going to wrap up all of our emails. That's going to wrap up our segment and this episode as well. Ren, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Just want to thank, WhatTheBuck.net and the Peter Plank again for, bringing me on and let me contribute and be an outlet for another outlet, I guess I should say, from my point of view and some things that I want to talk about when it pertains to the Buccaneers, or I should say write about. You can follow me on Twitter at Rendex, capital REN_DAXT. Love to talk Bucs all the time. And I've said it before, I'm going to start bringing it back. We're entering the golden age of Buck fandom. With Javier said in his email, we got the head coach, we got the GM. I think we can even go as far as say we have the capologist, we have the defensive coordinator, we got the quarterback, one of the best rosters since I can remember. Mm-hmm. I should do that. I wonder if I should do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I think I'm going to do a piece on comparing the 2002 Super Bowl roster against the roster, this year's roster, projected starters. That would be fun. So if anybody hears that, and anybody's writing for one of the sites, you can steal it, I guess. But yeah,
first one to publish owns it.
That's right. So it's just going to be a lot of fun this year, and I can't wait. Training camp's coming up. We're going to be busy. But there's no other way I'd want to spend my entire August except talking Bucs football, going to practice. Apparently I get to meet Brent for the first time. Brent and I have never met in person.
Yeah.
I've
fun.
never touched him. So should be good. I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait. Let's go.
Never touched me.
Never touched him.
Bucs fans. As final thoughts for me, I just want to give one more big shout out and thank you to two group of people. One, to everyone who sent in an email, a comment, a response, a tweet, a Facebook message, whatever, to answer one of the questions, just to really be a part of this episode. You guys helped make it happen. And a super big shout out to Jason Vuic, author of the Yucks. You guys, like I said one more time, make sure you buy the book if you haven't already. Read it. It's actually a really fun read. Super fun about the history of our beloved Buccaneers. Guys, that's going to wrap up everything here. Just as a final reminder, you can get in touch with us about anything we have talked about today on Facebook.com/ThePewterCast or at Twitter @ThePewterCast. Or if you're a little more winded than 140 characters, email us to thepewtercast@gmail.com. Or if you want to get a hold of me personally, I am at Brent Allen Live. And that's going to do it for us, guys, this week. The long, dark night of football is over, guys. Listen, the next time you guys hear us, it's going to start coming at you. It's going to come at you hard. It's going to come at you fast. That's what she said. Until next time, Bucs fans, go Bucs.
I wrote my first book on the Yugo car, the rise and fall of the worst car in history, and that's what sold. It really did well. And I got hate mail from all over the world defending the Yugo.
Oh, really?
So I expected Buccaneers fans to send me, pipe bombs, but they really didn't care. I mean, maybe they're not readers. I don't know. But I got hate mail from India. When I mentioned a Tata Nano car as being the next Yugo. I got hate mail. Hate mail in the mail from India. Oh, smart.
Wow.
So, the Bucs fans have treated me well, I have to say.